Hey guys, tonight we're headed into one of the most notorious, chaotic and grimy places in American history. A place where your boots squelch with something unidentifiable before you've even walked a block, and where the air smells like hot cabbage, old sweat and regret. Welcome to 5 Points, New York City, circa the 1850s. You're not here for long. Let's be honest, you probably won't survive this. Between the typhus, the gang violence, and the collapsing buildings, there's a good chance you end up with some combination of a head injury and a deeply unsettling rash. But hey, while you're still breathing, you might as well get a taste of what life was like in this festering slice of Manhattan. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. I put out these nighttime dives into strange, forgotten history, so you can drift off with a head full of weird facts and soot-covered dreams. And tell me, where are you watching from? And what time is it in your part of the world? I love seeing how far these stories travel. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You step off a creaking wooden cart near Center Street, shoes already soaked from a splash that came out of a gutter pipe, or maybe it was just a puddle. Either way, it smells like the Hudson had a drunken cousin, and that cousin passed out right here. It's loud, not just noisy, but crowded, clanging, chaotic. Sounds you can't even identify. Metal crashing against stone, babies crying, a fiddle playing something weirdly cheerful, and someone definitely shouting about either bread or murder. Maybe both. The buildings are impossibly close together and lean like drunkards. Some look like they've already started collapsing. Others are clearly just waiting their turn. Cracks run along the brick like veins on tired hands, and wooden scaffolds hug the facades like skeletal braces. You notice right away, there's barely any daylight reaching the narrow streets. The alleys, called courts, if you're feeling poetic, are barely wide enough for a man to squeeze sideways. Windows are permanently propped open with bits of wood and string, releasing the scents of old stew, boiling rags, and sometimes worse. Welcome to 5 Points. Technically, it's where 5 streets meet: Anthony, Cross, Orange, Mulberry, and Little Water. The intersection itself is oddly shaped, crooked, almost awkward, like the planners gave up halfway through and decided to just let it grow like a weed. This area used to be a pond. Seriously, a real pond. Collect Pond, they called it. Clean water once shimmered here, fish flitted under the surface, and Manhattanites came to picnic and ice skate. But then the industries came. Tanneries, slaughterhouses, breweries. They dumped waste into the water until it turned into a steaming cauldron of death. So the city, ever optimistic, filled it in with garbage and built houses on top. Spoiler, this didn't go well. The fill settled, unevenly. Houses sank, cracked, buckled, cellars flooded, and all that buried muck, rotting carcasses, leather scraps, coal tar, started belching gases through the floorboards. People still moved in because rent was cheap and Manhattan was booming. 5 Points became the first real American slum, a preview of the urban nightmares to come. But here's the twist. While it's hellish, it's also fascinating, because this is where America's melting pot actually melted. In the 1850s, 5 Points was home to some of the first truly integrated neighbourhoods in the country. Irish Catholics lived next door to free black families, German immigrants, Chinese laundrymen, Jewish peddlers, Italian fruit sellers, all crammed together in a chaotic, volatile mix. It was a place of incredible energy, if you could survive it. Some did more than survive. Some thrived. Take the old brewery, for example. This massive brick structure was once a respectable beer factory. By the 1850s, it had been converted, if you can call it that, into a multi-family tenement. More than 1,000 people lived there at one point. The hallways were so narrow and dark that candles barely helped. Rooms were divided with blankets or nothing at all. People cooked, slept, argued, and died in full earshot of each other. The old brewery wasn't just a building, it was practically a myth, a slum within a slum, the kind of place reformers toured in horror and gang leaders ruled like feudal lords. There's one smell that really defines the 5 Points: wet wood. It's everywhere. The tenement walls, the broken staircases, the beams that hold the place upright, barely. It's always wet, soaked from rain, leaks, spills, and just human life. Mix that with smoke from wood stoves and the sweet, nauseating tang of overripe fruit from a nearby cart, and you've got a signature 5 Points cocktail. Fact, Charles Dickens came here. He hated it. In his American travelogue, he described the area with a kind of appalled awe, like someone watching a raccoon steal a baby carriage. It was more crowded and chaotic than anything he'd seen in London, and he'd seen London. Here's a quirky detail. Pigs. Actual pigs wandered the streets. They weren't wild. They were owned, sort of. Residents let them roam to eat trash. Street sanitation by swine. Occasionally people would just eat the pigs. That's the circle of life, 5 Points style. Now there's a scholarly debate that lingers. Was 5 Points truly the worst slum in the world, as reformers love to say, or was that reputation inflated by sensationalist reporters and upper-class moralists? Some modern historians argue that parts of it were just normal working-class life, unfairly demonised. Others point to the relentless disease, crime, and filth and say nope, it really was that bad. The truth's probably somewhere in between. This was a place of pain and possibility, suffering and survival, and tonight you're going to walk through all of it. But for now, take another breath, preferably through your mouth, and keep moving. You haven't even made it to Paradise Square yet, and trust me, the name is wildly misleading. You're probably wondering how this swampy, crumbling corner of New York became the most infamous slum in America. Like, how do you go from a peaceful little pond to a place where people casually toss buckets of waste out the window like it's part of the morning routine? Well, to understand 5 Points, you have to rewind the tape a bit. Let's back up to when the neighbourhood wasn't a hellmouth. Originally, Collect Pond was the jewel of colonial Manhattan. Deep, spring-fed and clean enough to drink from, it sat right in the heart of the island. Wealthy families picnicked there. People went ice skating in winter. It was lovely, picturesque. Until the city, in its infinite wisdom, decided to build all the nasty stuff around it. Tanneries, slaughterhouses, breweries, all of them needed water, and all of them dumped their waste straight into the pond. No filtration, no regulation, just out of sight, out of mind. Spoiler alert, it was never out of sight or out of smell. By the early 1800s, Collect Pond was basically a toxic soup. So, what did they do about this bubbling biohazard? They filled it in. Not with clean soil, of course, but with garbage, sand, and whatever junk they could find. It was rushed, poorly engineered, and as soon as the buildings went up, everything started sinking. The fill settled unevenly. Water seeped up from below and foundations cracked. Basements flooded permanently. Streets buckled. Houses leaned like they were whispering secrets to each other. And this was the neighbourhood people were supposed to live in. Enter the first wave of poor immigrants, mostly Irish by the mid-1840s, fleeing the Great Famine. They arrived hungry, desperate, and willing to live anywhere. The 5 Points welcomed them with open arms and a pervasive smell of rotting onions. Over the next decade, more and more people crammed into the area. Every boarding house stuffed extra cots into the attic. Every parlour was turned into a sleeping room. Landlords realised they could make a fortune subdividing buildings into tiny rental spaces and let them rot. Why fix a roof when your tenants don't speak English and are too scared to complain? You walk past a tenement, 4 stories of mismatched brick and timber, and glance into an open doorway. There's a hallway so narrow even your shoulders brush the walls. A single gaslight flickers at the far end. The floor is uneven, the air heavy with coal smoke and boiled cabbage. Upstairs, children's feet thump like a broken drum. That house used to be one big family's home. Now it holds 40 people, sometimes more. And that's the thing, nobody planned this. 5 Points wasn't designed. It happened. Manhattan exploded with growth in the early 1800s. Immigrants poured in by the shipload. The rich moved north, away from the stench and noise. The poor stayed behind, carving lives out of a place that wasn't meant to be lived in. There was no zoning, no building codes, no inspections, just layers and layers of desperation built on top of each other. By the 1850s, 5 Points was overcrowded beyond belief. Some estimates put the population density at over 300 people per acre. That's tighter than modern-day refugee camps, and that number doesn't even include the transient population. People who drifted through the neighbourhood. Sailors, labourers, criminals, performers, preachers, and con artists. It's worth noting that this was also one of the first truly racially mixed neighbourhoods in America. Black families, many of them free since New York abolished slavery in 1827, lived side by side with Irish immigrants. That was rare. In most of the city, housing segregation was the norm, but in 5 Points, poverty shoved everyone into the same crowded buildings. Did that lead to perfect harmony? Not even close. Racial tension was always simmering just below the surface, but still, it meant a kind of forced integration that was practically unheard of elsewhere. One thing everyone had in common: the grind. Most adults worked grueling, low-paying jobs. Men took day labour, dock work, or drove carts. Women did laundry, took in sewing, or worked as domestic servants uptown, if they were lucky. If not, they found other, less respectable ways to make ends meet. Kids sold matches, begged, picked pockets. Everyone hustled. There were no safety nets. If you couldn't pay rent, you got tossed out, sometimes literally. If you got sick, well, good luck with that. Here's a strange little detail. The soil under 5 Points was still soft and damp from the old pond. That meant the streets never really dried out. You could walk down Orange Street on a sunny summer day and still splash into ankle-deep sludge. Drainage was non-existent. Rain turned everything into a soup of horse droppings, ash and human waste. In the winter, it froze into a crust that hid ice beneath soot. In the spring, it thawed into something that could honestly qualify as a war crime. And yet, people lived here. People loved here too. They married, had children, celebrated holidays. They found ways to make it work, even amid the chaos. Some set up tiny businesses, a pie stand, a tailor's nook, a cobbler's bench under a stairwell. Others turned parts of their rooms into makeshift taverns. And then there were the backyard economies. People selling used buttons, broken shoes, leftover coal. Nothing was wasted. Nothing was free. Scholars still argue over how much of 5 Points' reputation was deserved. Some believe the slum was exaggerated by Protestant reformers who saw Catholic poverty as both a moral failing and a public scandal. Others say the filth, disease and crime were worse than anyone can really understand. It's probably both. You can almost picture the dichotomy. A child playing stickball in the street while a drunk stumbles into a mud puddle nearby. A woman humming an Irish lullaby while boiling laundry in grey water. A preacher shouting scripture on one corner and a thief picking pockets on the next. So yeah, that's how it got this bad. A pond-turned poison pit, a housing crisis, waves of immigration, zero planning. And somehow, through all of that, a neighbourhood emerged, terrible and tenacious. As you walk further in, the air gets thicker, the voices louder. You're not just passing through history anymore, you're part of it. You're still walking. The street beneath your feet squishes in a way streets really shouldn't. Every step is a game of, is this mud or something worse? Spoiler, it's usually something worse. You edge around a pile of broken bricks and food scraps, then pass under a sagging clothesline that practically slaps you in the forehead. Welcome to your new home, if you've got a few cents and absolutely no standards. Let's talk about where people actually lived in the 5 Points. And by lived, we mean barely survived while cohabiting with mould, insects, and more rodents than you'd think biologically possible. Imagine a narrow 4-storey building leaning slightly to one side like it's trying to lie down. It's made of crumbling brick, patched in places with wood, tin, or whatever someone found in the alley. A faded wooden sign out front reads, "Boarding rooms, weekly rates." Inside, the stairwell is barely wide enough for a child, and the banister feels like it could give way if you sneeze too hard. The air smells like smoke, damp socks, and something faintly sour. Maybe stew, maybe someone's breath. Each floor has maybe 3 or 4 rooms, though calling them that is optimistic. A family of 6 might live in a single 8x10 space, sharing a straw mattress and taking turns sleeping. There's no running water, of course. If you're lucky, there's a shared outhouse in the courtyard. If you're not lucky, and most aren't, you're carrying slop buckets up and down the stairs. Oh, and just so we're clear, people dump them in the gutter every morning. You hear a shout of "look out below" before the splash sometimes. Other times, not so much. The floorboards creak and sag. In some rooms, they're rotting through. Kids have fallen right through the floor into the apartment below. Rats chew through walls, nibble on laundry, and occasionally scurry across your chest in the night. It's said that you can hear them chewing inside the walls, constant, relentless. They're not shy either. Some are as big as cats. Not even joking. There are accounts of rats dragging off infants' food while they were still eating it. Now let's talk about rent, because yes, people paid to live in these conditions. Landlords weren't just tolerated, they were thriving. In 1850s, 5 points, a single room might go for $6 a month. Doesn't sound like much, until you realise most people earned $1 or $2 per week if they were lucky. So tenants doubled up, then tripled. Some rooms housed up to 15 people at once, sleeping in shifts, curled against the walls like spoons in a drawer. Privacy? Not a thing. You change clothes under a blanket, if you had one. In some buildings, entire families lived in the basement, known as cellar dwellers. These places were perpetually damp, poorly ventilated, and so dark that candles barely helped. Water seeped through the walls constantly, especially during storms. Mould grew on every surface. And if that wasn't enough, cellars flooded regularly, like ankle-deep water regularly. People still lived there because it was the cheapest option. You could rent a corner of a cellar, toss your belongings in a crate and call it home. There's this one building. Locals call it the Garrett House. No one knows exactly how many people live there at any given time. Some say 80, others say over 150. It's like a human beehive. Rooms are divided with hanging blankets or rough wooden partitions. Some families bring in chickens. Others run little businesses from inside, mending clothes, selling potatoes, boiling coffee in tin pots over small stoves. It's noisy, it's hot, it's probably a fire hazard, and yes, it's absolutely full of fleas. Speaking of which, bedbugs. They're not a modern invention. They were thriving here long before Airbnb. Mattresses, if you even have one, are rarely more than stuffed sacks of straw or horsehair, usually crawling with bugs. Some people sleep on the floor with rolled up coats. Others just find a spot under the stairwell and curl up, hoping no one steps on them during the night. And yet, somehow, people tried to make these places feel like home. They hung curtains, sometimes just scraps of cloth. They placed worn photographs or religious icons in corners. Kids drew on the walls. Women shared recipes, gossiped in stairwells, borrowed sugar from one another. It was miserable, sure, but it was also real life. When everything's falling apart, even a patch of sunlight on a cracked floor feels precious. Here's a fun, bizarre fact for you. Because many buildings were so unstable, it wasn't unheard of for walls to literally fall down. People would wake up and suddenly have a view of the street because part of their building had collapsed overnight. Entire tenements crumbled under heavy rain or snow. The city would send someone out to survey the damage, then slap up a cheap wooden brace and move on. Fixing the building? Please! That's not in the budget. There's an ongoing debate among historians about the motives of the landlords. Were they just greedy and evil, or were they barely scraping by themselves? Some argue that 5 Point slumlords were often absentee owners, rich folks uptown who never saw the conditions they profited from. Others claim that some landlords lived in the neighbourhood too, and were just part of the grind, trying to survive like everyone else. Either way, tenants had no real recourse. There were no housing inspectors, no tenant unions, no code violations. If you didn't like it, you could leave, assuming you had anywhere else to go. For many, though, 5 Points was their only option. Irish immigrants fleeing famine couldn't exactly be picky. Black families facing racism and housing discrimination had nowhere else to go. Newly arrived Germans and Italians ended up here because it was the first stop on the immigrant chain. The conditions were awful, but the community was there, and that made all the difference. You pass a group of women scrubbing laundry in shared tubs in a filthy courtyard, laughing over something you don't catch. A man with no shoes hammers away at a pair of boots by candlelight. A toddler chases a chicken up a staircase. Someone's yelling in Italian from an upper window. It's a mess, a cacophony, a hazard zone. But it's also alive. And somehow, that makes it survivable. Just don't lean on that railing. It's not attached to anything. It hits you before you even turn the corner. A wall of scent, thick and sour, rides the breeze like a punch to the nose. It's not one smell. It's layers, decades really, of rot, waste, grease, smoke, and despair, woven together into something that might qualify as sentient. Welcome to the part of 5 Points that always finds you first. The smell. It's the one thing every visitor remembers. No matter what street you walk down, Mulberry Cross, Bayard, you're breathing in the neighbourhood before you ever see it. And yes, it's just as bad as everyone says. What does it actually smell like? Imagine boiled cabbage left out in the sun. Then add raw sewage, horse manure, wood smoke, stale beer, fish bones, wet leather, and whatever's fermenting in that puddle over there. That puddle's been there for a while, it's got a little ecosystem in it now, bugs, tadpoles, possibly a tiny society with its own laws. People just step around it like it's part of the scenery, because it is. In 5 points you learn to accept things like puddles that never dry up, and meat that smells a little off. One of the biggest offenders, the open sewers. Yeah, that's right, open. The street gutters double as drainage ditches. When it rains, everything floods. The waste, the garbage, the remains of someone's dinner, someone's bath, someone's other stuff. It all washes together into a grimy grey river that snakes along the curb. You learn pretty quickly not to stand near the edge. And if you live on a lower floor, hope you like the smell of backed up human waste wafting through your windows. Trash collection, not a thing, not reliably anyway. The city sends carts occasionally, but mostly people just toss refuse into the alleys or let pigs eat it. Yes, pigs. Still wandering the streets, chewing on melon rinds and mouldy bread. They're like the street cleaning crew, except cuter and wildly unsanitary. You've seen at least 3 today, including one that made eye contact with you while rooting through what was definitely a boot. Then there's the slaughterhouse runoff. Just outside 5 points are several small butcheries and animal yards. They process livestock right in the city, and the runoff, blood, bones, bits, drains downhill. Guess which neighbourhood is downhill? By midday, the blood mixes with sewage in the gutters. It's not rare to see a child skipping through a rivulet that is at least 30% pig's blood and hope. And the stench lingers. Not just in the street, but in your clothes, your hair, your teeth. You carry 5 points with you, like it or not. Inside tenements, it's not much better. Most apartments have no ventilation. In summer, the heat cooks every smell inside like a slow stew. You walk into a room and it hits you. The sour stink of unwashed bodies, damp linens, leftover food and coal smoke. Add the ever-present tang of chamber pots, and you've got yourself a scent that could clear sinuses and probably kill a weaker man. In winter, it's different. The smell of burning soft coal fills every room, coating your tongue in soot, making your nose run black. But at least it covers up the other smells. Kind of. And don't even start with the market stalls. There's a long stretch near Bayard Street where vendors sell spoiled vegetables and meat, too far gone for proper shops. They're cheap, so poor families buy them, scrape off the worst parts, boil the rest, and hope nobody dies. You pass a fish stall where the eels are still alive, but barely. They twitch in a pan of lukewarm water, their gills working like they're begging to be put out of their misery. The smell is unbearable, a sharp ammonia slap followed by the rich rot of sea things that should have stayed at sea. Here's your quirky fact for the night. At one point in the 1850s, a particularly enterprising man tried to bottle 5 points air as a novelty, claimed it could cure breathing ailments by shocking the lungs. Whether it was a prank or a grift is still debated, but he actually sold a few bottles before someone probably opened one and immediately died. And this is where a fascinating debate unfolds. What role did these conditions play in shaping urban health reform? Some historians argue that 5 points was so viscerally awful, it shocked the city into action. Reformers like Jacob Riis and the Ladies' Home Mission wouldn't come along for a few decades, but even in the 1850s, people were starting to document the horrors. Early sanitation maps were drawn here. Doctors used 5 points as a case study for disease spread. Others pushed back, saying reform was slow and reluctant, and that the elite used the stench as moral ammunition to justify policing the poor, not helping them. The truth, as always, is murky, and probably smelled like cabbage. Now here's the part that'll make you pause. People got used to it. They adapted. Your nose dulls after a while. New arrivals are overwhelmed, but after a week or two they stop noticing. They move through the stink like fish through water. You see a kid eating a sandwich barefoot in the street while sitting beside a mound of unidentifiable goo. He doesn't care. This is his normal. And honestly, if the choice is smell or starvation, you take the smell. But let's not pretend this didn't have real consequences. The air carried disease. That stench wasn't just unpleasant, it was infectious. Miasma theory was still in full swing, and while they didn't know about germs yet, people did associate smell with sickness, and for good reason. In 5 points, bad air often meant cholera, typhus, dysentery. Whole blocks would reek of illness before the first corpse hit the street. People knew to move out, if they could, when the stink changed. When it got sharper, thinner, more metallic. The air itself told you someone was dying. Yet somehow, Life went on. Street musicians played through the fumes. Lovers met in doorways that reeked of vinegar and kerosene. Babies were born in rooms thick with smoke and sweat and hope. And yes, someone is still trying to fry fish in that alley over there. It's definitely burned on the outside and raw in the middle, but it smells better than most things around here. So yeah, the smell of 5 Points is more than just an unpleasant footnote. It's the invisible character in every story here. It's in every breath, every room, every argument and lullaby and whispered prayer. You never get away from it. You just learn to live with it. You finally make it to the corner where 3 streets collide, and for a brief moment you're surrounded by voices in 5 different languages. You hear Irish lilts, clipped German syllables, the low rhythmic drawl of a black preacher reciting a verse, and someone arguing in what sounds like Italian, but could also be Yiddish. It's hard to tell over the din of clanking pots and the heavy hooves of a cart being pulled too fast. This is 5 Points in the 1850s, where the American melting pot isn't just simmering, it's boiling over. If New York is a city of immigrants, then 5 Points is the gritty, overcrowded lobby where they all arrive and try not to drown. You pass by a dilapidated tenement, the kind that leans just enough to make you cross the street in case it falls. In one window, a black woman hangs her laundry. On the floor below, a pair of Irish boys practice boxing moves with fists wrapped in rags. Through the open front door, you spot a Polish woman with a baby tied to her chest, arguing with someone in German over a shared cooking fire. There are probably more languages being spoken in this one building than in the average university lecture hall. But instead of textbooks, everyone's got laundry, soup pots, or a bottle of homemade gin. In the 1850s, 5 Points is one of the most diverse places in the entire country. A true tangle of displaced people, driven here by famine, slavery, war, and poverty. The largest group by far is the Irish. By this point, the Great Famine back in Ireland has driven hundreds of thousands of people across the Atlantic, many arriving with nothing but a name and a deep hatred of potatoes. They pour off ships at Castle Garden, clutching ragged sacks and infants, and fan out into the slums. 5 Points, being close to the docks and cheap to live in, if you define living loosely, is the first stop for most. But the Irish aren't alone. Black families, some freeborn and others formerly enslaved, already live here. In fact, 5 Points is one of the few places in New York where African Americans can own property and run businesses. They've been here for decades, forming tightly knit communities in the midst of poverty and prejudice. The fusion of Irish and black cultures creates something unique. Shared music, food, even friendship in some cases, though it's often tense and fragile. Sometimes they marry, sometimes they fight, sometimes both, in the same week. Then come the Germans, fleeing failed revolutions and economic collapse. They bring sausages, strong beer, and a general sense of order that lasts about 5 minutes in 5 Points. Many of them stick together in boarding houses, trying to build lives in a city that sees them as just another wave of outsiders. And over the years, the Italians trickle in too, usually settling in the same tenement floors as people who don't speak their language, don't eat their food, and don't care to understand them. It sounds like chaos, and it is, but it's also the raw stuff of America. People thrown together not because they like each other, but because they're broke, desperate, and have nowhere else to go. And in that stew of hardship, something strange happens. Culture blends. You hear fiddle music mixed with banjo rhythms drifting out of saloons. Irish jigs and African drumming start to cross-pollinate, birthing new dances and eventually a whole new sound. What will later become tap dance has its roots right here, on these filthy cobblestones. You notice that kids especially don't care much for boundaries. They run together in packs, barefoot, loud and laughing, chasing each other down alleys and across rooftops. A black boy with a wooden toy sword duels an Irish girl wielding a broom handle. Behind them, an Italian toddler waddles after a stolen apple. To them, language and skin colour are just background noise. They've got bigger things to worry about, like finding lunch or avoiding Mrs. Callahan, who throws shoes at anyone who steps on her stoop. Still, tensions bubble under the surface. Irish immigrants, viewed by the upper classes as unwashed, papist and dangerous, often turn their frustrations toward black neighbours, who are themselves constantly battling institutional racism and systemic poverty. Competition for the same jobs, housing and resources creates friction, and sometimes that turns violent. Riots have broken out before. They will again. It's one of the ugly truths of 5 Points. Unity exists, but it's brittle, held together by convenience, not solidarity. There's a lesser-known fact here. A significant number of 5 Points residents were from the Caribbean. Free people of colour from places like Haiti and Jamaica settled here, bringing French, Creole, and Afro-Caribbean cultural influences into the already chaotic swirl. These communities often established their own churches, schools, and social groups, sometimes more progressive than the rest of New York in their approach to education and family structure. It's an overlooked part of the 5 Point story, but if you listen closely, you'll hear the traces in the songs sung on porches and the spices drifting from shared cooking fires. And let's not forget the Chinese laundries that begin to pop up toward the late 1850s. At first, they're dismissed or mocked, but they're an essential part of the economy. Chinese immigrants, usually men, often isolated by language and cultural barriers, find a niche here. Their presence adds another layer to this already overcrowded cake of identity. And as more groups arrive, the tower of misunderstanding and mistrust grows ever taller, teetering above the already cracked foundations of poverty. Historians still argue about how integrated 5 Points really was. Some claim it was a model of early multiculturalism. Poor, yes, but relatively inclusive. Others insist that the proximity of different races and ethnicities didn't erase prejudice so much as amplify it. That the violence and inequality were just as bad, just more cramped. The truth, like always, is somewhere in the middle. Yes, people lived together, but peace was a daily negotiation, not a given. You turn onto Cross Street and walk past a row of stalls selling used clothes, bruised fruit, and the occasional suspicious meat pie. A black preacher reads from a tattered Bible, while an Irish woman yells at her kids in a brogue thick enough to slice bread. Somewhere nearby, someone's playing a fiddle, and whoever's dancing is either very talented or having a full-body seizure. This is what 5 Points sounds like, what it looks like, what it is. Confused, conflicted, loud, layered, and somehow still standing. And you haven't even reached the real trouble yet. Let's get one thing straight before we go any further. Just because you live in 5 Points doesn't mean you've given up. Sure, the streets are basically compost piles with ambition, and yes, there are more rats than rules, but not everyone here is lawless or drunk or dancing barefoot on broken glass. Among the chaos and grime are people doing their best to hold on to some sense of dignity. They iron their shirts, they scrub their stoops, they send their kids to school. Well, when there is a school and the roof isn't caving in. Welcome to the quieter, mostly overlooked world of the respectable poor, the ones trying to make it through this mess without sinking into it. You walk past a narrow brick building that's at least 40 degrees off square and pause at the open window where a young woman is carefully mending a pair of trousers by oil lamp. Her hair is pinned back neatly, her apron spotless. Inside, you spot a shelf with 2 candles, a few folded shirts, and a little wooden cross. Her room is barely big enough to turn around in, but it's tidy. That's the point. Respectability doesn't come from what you have. It comes from how you carry what little you've got. For people in 5 Points, respectability is survival. The respectable poor are often heads of large families, hard-working immigrants, free black citizens, single mothers, or elderly widows holding the line against the neighbourhood's downward slide. They go to church, they follow the law, or at least try to, and they do everything in their power to avoid the shame of being lumped in with the drunks, thieves, and vagrants who fill the saloons and brothels just a block away. It's not easy. Every day feels like trying to keep your white shirt clean during a tomato fight. For many Irish families, respectability is tightly wrapped up in Catholic virtue and hard work. You meet a father of 6 who works 12 hours a day digging trenches uptown, then comes home to a room where his wife has kept the kids quiet and the floor swept. He wears the same shirt every day and polishes his boots on Sunday mornings like a badge of honour. He's poor, but he's proud. He sends his children to mass and dreams of the day when his family can move a few blocks north to something with more than one window and fewer visible rats. Black families in 5 Points have their own version of this battle. For them, the fight for respectability is also a fight for humanity in a society that constantly denies it. Churches double as community centres and schools. Women organise mutual aid societies to care for widows, orphans and the sick. Men open small businesses, barbershops, tailors, cold delivery routes, and wear their Sunday best to work. Everything, from polished shoes to practised manners, is part of resisting the stereotype that blackness equals poverty equals vice. In 5 Points, where even survival is hard, this kind of resistance is quietly heroic. You pass a building where a German tailor and his family have set up shop on the ground floor. The sign says Heinrich Schneider, suits pressed and repaired, hand-painted in careful block letters. The front room is spotless, lined with neat bolts of cloth and little jars of buttons. Behind the counter, Heinrich's wife teaches their daughter to read by lantern light. Upstairs, his elderly mother boils cabbage in a pot over a fire fed with splintered furniture. They are immigrants, yes, but they are not lost. They are trying to rise one stitch at a time. Respectability here doesn't mean comfort, it means making choices. Not drinking, even though a gin bottle costs less than a loaf of bread. Not stealing, even when your kid is crying from hunger. Not running with the local gang, even when they offer protection or pay. It's about discipline in a world that constantly punishes it, and it's fragile. One illness, one injury, one missed rent payment, and you slip. Suddenly you're not respectable anymore. You're just another mouth in the soup line. The line between pride and ruin is paper-thin and constantly wet. Here's a strange little footnote. Some families in 5 Points made a point of dressing better than their means. You'd see women in pressed dresses and shawls, men in polished hats and stiff collars, outfits clearly second-hand but treated like treasure. Why? Because appearance mattered. If you looked clean and orderly, shopkeepers treated you better. You got hired more often. You were less likely to be harassed by police or jeered by neighbours. In 5 Points, your clothing could mean the difference between getting hired or getting ignored, between dignity and dismissal. There's a fascinating debate among historians about whether respectability in places like 5 Points was genuine pride or social pressure, a survival mechanism rather than a moral choice. Some argue that these efforts were a kind of internalized classism, a way to say, I may be poor, but I'm not that kind of poor. Others see it as defiance, poor people refusing to become caricatures in a city that treated them as walking failures. Maybe it's both. Either way, it's clear. Not everyone in 5 Points was a drunk or a criminal. Many were just trying to live decent lives in a deeply indecent place. And make no mistake, it was risky. Being respectable didn't keep the rent collector from pounding on your door or the cholera wagon from taking your neighbour. It didn't stop the gangs from shaking you down or the police from arresting you for something your cousin did. But still, people got up each morning, scrubbed their faces with freezing water, combed their hair, and walked out into the filth with their heads held high. You watch a group of schoolchildren pass by, led by a stern woman in a black bonnet. They're carrying slates and spelling books, trying their best to avoid stepping in puddles. Behind them, a drunk stumbles out of a saloon, yelling something unintelligible about Queen Victoria and meat pies. The children flinch but keep walking. That's what you do here. You walk past the chaos and keep going, because if you stop too long, the neighbourhood swallows you. So while the headlines scream about gang fights and squalor, don't forget the quiet ones, the ones scrubbing their floors, teaching their kids, and praying for a better life. In the shadows of the worst buildings in America, some people are doing their best to be good. And maybe, just maybe, that's the hardest thing of all. You turn onto Orange Street and right away you can tell something's different. The air hangs a little heavier here. The buildings lean in closer, like they're conspiring. The grime seems thicker, the puddles more alive, and the stink, well, it has a certain personality now. Locals call this stretch the reeking mouth of 5 Points, and you're about to find out why. If you could smell through history books, this street would have its own chapter. Orange Street is chaos in slow motion. Every sense is overwhelmed. There are vendors hawking bruised fruit next to someone hammering horseshoes, next to a man preaching fire and brimstone to an audience of half-listening dogs. You sidestep a chicken, then immediately regret it because now your boot is submerged in something foul and warm. Don't think too hard about it. Just keep moving. This street, more than any other in 5 Points, captures the neighbourhood's full personality. Half funeral, half carnival, all noise. A couple of shirtless kids run past you screaming in Italian, their arms full of pilfered bread. A dog howls from a rooftop. A fiddler plays a frantic tune that's somewhere between Irish jig and an actual cry for help. And above it all, laundry flaps like desperate white flags. Many of the tenements on Orange are former row houses, old Dutch-style buildings gutted and rebuilt into stacked hellholes. They've been patched so many times, you're not sure what the original structure looked like. Some buildings have doors nailed shut, windows without glass, or walls that stop halfway up. And inside, you don't want to know, But you're about to find out. You enter one of the buildings because, let's be honest, morbid curiosity is stronger than self-preservation. The stairwell is dark and so narrow your shoulders brush both walls. A single candle flickers on the landing, casting more shadows than light. You hear a baby crying above, someone coughing hard nearby, and below, what might be a very heated card game or a low-level exorcism. The smell inside is somehow worse than the street. Stale urine, damp wood, and human misery baked into every brick. Each floor is a new ecosystem. One family sells boiled potatoes from a steaming pot near the stairs. A man in the hallway repairs shoes by gaslight. In one room, 6 people sleep shoulder to shoulder on the floor while a 7th reads a book aloud to them. Something about saints and suffering. Everyone ignores the rats darting between them. No time to be afraid when you're this exhausted. You step out into the back courtyard, which isn't really a courtyard at all. Just a narrow gap between buildings, filled with ash, broken crates, and what's left of a last week's washwater. A woman is scrubbing a copper pot with sand while a child drags a bundle of kindling across the mud. Above you, dozens of ropes stretch between windows, heavy with dripping clothes and the occasional mystery item. Someone's underpants slap you in the face. You pretend it didn't happen and keep walking. Here's the quirky historical detail of the day. Orange Street was once considered the cultural hub of 5 Points. For real. Dance halls, taverns, boarding houses. It was the Broadway of the slums, minus the lights, and with significantly more cholera. Some of the first interracial dance venues in the city sprang up right here. People of different backgrounds, black, Irish, German, would gather in smoky rooms to stomp, clap, and slide their troubles away. It didn't last, of course. The tension outside those walls always found its way in. But for a while, people found rhythm amid the rot. In the early evening, the street changes tone again. It gets louder, rowdier. Men spill out of saloons with their jackets unbuttoned and their tempers half-loaded. Women call from doorways, offering company or curses depending on your luck. Kids gather around makeshift games. Coins, buttons, a dead rat they've named governor. A group of older boys are arguing about whether to sneak into a brewery for scraps or pickpockets down at Paradise Square. Either way, someone's getting chased by the watch. You pass a storefront that used to be a butcher's shop. Now it's a pie vendor. Well, that's what the sign says. The pies themselves are questionable. One looks like it has turnips and mystery meat, another appears to be all crust and disappointment. Still, the line is long. Food is food. You overhear someone whisper, "It's mostly cat this week," and no one bats an eye. And then there are the residents who never leave their stoops. You see them perched like gargoyles, old men wrapped in blankets, women with clay pipes clenched between yellowed teeth. They've seen everything. Fires, fights, arrests, epidemics. They don't flinch when a drunk man stumbles into a wall or when a kid falls off a ladder and gets up laughing. They just nod. Another day on Orange Street. Now, not everyone agrees on how accurate the street's reputation was. Some argue that reformers and newspaper men exaggerated the squalor to sell papers or push political agendas. Others say the truth was actually worse, especially in summer, when heat turned every gutter into a bacterial love letter. There's evidence on both sides. Diaries, police reports, and missionary accounts paint a picture of a place too dangerous to walk at night, too loud to sleep and too filthy to breathe in. But then you find letters from residents who talk about the community here, the kindness of neighbours, the music, the laughter. Maybe it depends on where you stand, or how strong your stomach is. By nightfall, the street glows with lanterns and sways with music. Somewhere, a woman sings in Irish. Somewhere else, a preacher bellows warnings about eternal damnation. In between, you hear babies crying, bottles breaking, and a band of children reciting street rhymes that somehow include both nursery rhythms and profanity. The reeking mouth of Orange Street never closes. It just hums louder. So if you're standing here now under the laundry and behind the pie cart trying to make sense of it all, don't. Orange Street doesn't make sense. It exists. A living stinking artery pumping people and noise and dreams through the centre of 5 Points. You're part of it now, whether you like it or not. Just don't lean on the wall. It's damp for reasons you're not emotionally prepared to understand. If you thought the grime and stink of 5 Points were its most dangerous features, think again. You haven't even met the neighbours who really run this place, not the landlords or the city officials. Please, they're barely involved. No, the real power on these streets is held by the gangs, and not the cartoonish movie-style versions where everyone has a cool nickname and matching outfits. Well, okay, there are nicknames and outfits, but these guys are far from theatrical. They're brutal, loud, loyal, and utterly unbothered by the idea of stabbing someone in broad daylight. So keep your head down, your pockets close, and don't make eye contact unless you're ready to bleed. The 5 Points of the 1850s is crawling with street gangs. Some are full-on criminal enterprises, others are more like glorified clubs with anger management issues, but nearly all of them are territorial, violent, and packed with young men who have very little to lose. They grow up tough, they fight rough, and if you're lucky, they'll ignore you. If you're not, well, you won't be lucky for long. First, there are the Dead Rabbits. Yes, that's really what they called themselves. The name likely came from a mistranslation or a joke, but over time it stuck. And oddly enough, it scared people. The Dead Rabbits were mostly Irish immigrants or Irish-American kids, working class and fiercely proud. They dressed in red shirts, wore tall stovepipe hats, and carried weapons that looked like they were built from spare parts. Knives, clubs, lengths of chain, sometimes even sharpened table legs. They fought for territory, for pride, and sometimes just because they could. Their enemies? Everyone, but especially the Bowery Boys. Ah, the Bowery Boys. Think of them as the Dead Rabbits' preppy nativist rivals. These were mostly Protestant American-born men, white collar during the day, thugs at night. They wore slick coats and slicker hair, carried brass knuckles and thick sticks, and believed themselves morally superior to the immigrant rabble south of Canal Street. They hated the Irish, hated Catholics, and hated the very idea of immigrants crowding into their city. You can already see where this is going. Now imagine these two groups clashing in the middle of a hot summer afternoon. No police in sight, just gangs rolling down the streets in mobs of 20, 50, even 100 strong. Rocks fly, bricks smash windows, screams echo through the alleys, knives flash in the sun, blood hits the cobblestones and mixes with the muck already there. It's not a movie, it's not a metaphor, it's Tuesday. You catch sight of a kid, maybe 12, maybe younger, standing at the edge of a fight, holding a club way too big for him. He's got dirt on his face and fire in his eyes. He's waiting for a moment to jump in, probably hoping to prove himself to the older boys. This is how it starts. You grow up on these streets, you get picked on, then you join a gang for protection, or revenge, or just to matter, and suddenly you're part of the cycle. You bleed, or you make someone bleed. And it's not just two gangs. The 5 Points had a whole ecosystem of them. The roach guards, short tails, shirt tails, plug uglies, each with its own turf, its own rituals, its own ridiculous name that stops being funny when they punch you in the throat. Some focused on petty theft. Others controlled brothels, gambling dens, or illegal boxing matches. Many did a little of everything. Crime was a business, and in 5 Points, it was booming. Here's a weird little detail. Some gangs held parades, full-on marching bands, banners, matching outfits, the whole deal. Imagine a group of young men marching past with flags and drums, only to brawl with another group doing the same 2 blocks over. It's like if the Rose Parade ended in a knife fight. To them, it wasn't just violence, it was identity, it was pride. What did the authorities do about all this? That's adorable, assuming you think the city had any control down here. The police force in the 1850s was still in its infancy, undermanned and often corrupt. Many officers were partisans themselves, loyal to either the Irish or the nativists, so they'd turn a blind eye, or worse, take part in the violence. The courts? Overwhelmed. Prisons? Full. Justice, if it came at all, arrived late and limping. Historians still debate how organised these gangs truly were. Some describe them as proto-mafias with hierarchical structures and codes of conduct. Others argue they were more fluid, just street kids with weapons and bad tempers. The truth is likely somewhere in between. The larger gangs did have leadership, and some even offered services to their neighbourhoods, protection, debt collection, or help finding work. But don't get too romantic. They were still violent, and loyalty often meant dying for a cause you barely understood. The real damage wasn't just physical. Gangs fractured neighbourhoods. They fed distrust between ethnic groups, inflamed political tensions, and made life harder for anyone trying to raise a family in peace. Respectable men had to navigate gang politics just to walk to work without being harassed. Mothers kept their sons inside after sunset. knowing it might be the difference between bedtime and a funeral. It wasn't just street crime, it was social warfare. And yet, there was a strange sort of rhythm to it all. You could predict when the fighting would erupt, on election days, on religious holidays, during strikes. There was almost a schedule to the chaos, and in between the brawls, people still lived their lives. You walk past a bakery where two women are kneading dough, completely unfazed by the recent bloodstains outside their door. Down the street, someone plays a fiddle, while a half-healed brawler limps past, nodding along. That's 5 points for you. Even in its violence, there's a kind of grim continuity. Things are awful, but at least they're predictably awful. You'll hear gunfire one night, then laughter the next. Someone gets stabbed, then someone gets married, and you might even see a Bowery boy and a dead rabbit drink together during a truce, just before everything falls apart again. So keep walking, eyes ahead, hands in your pockets. If someone asks where you're from, lie. If someone offers you a job, say no. And if you hear the stomp of boots or the clash of brass knuckles echoing around the next corner, turn around and walk the other way. Because you might be curious, but you're not invincible. And in 5 points that matters more than you think. You need a break. After the street fights, the collapsing buildings, and the smell that haunts your soul, you deserve at least one night out. Lucky for you, 5 points doesn't just know how to fight, it knows how to party. Welcome to the dive bars and dance halls, where the walls are sticky, the beer's flat, and the music might just be loud enough to drown out the crying infant upstairs. This isn't your elegant uptown ballroom with polished floors and polite applause. This is the basement beneath a butcher shop, lit by whale oil lamps and heated by the combined sweat of 50 strangers, doing something vaguely resembling a waltz, while shouting over a fiddler who may or may not be sober. The fun begins just after dark. The air is still thick and sour, but now it's laced with excitement. You hear the telltale sounds drifting through broken shutters, clapping hands, stomping boots, a violin soaring its way through an Irish jig, and someone belting out the chorus of a sea shanty with more volume than talent. You follow the noise down a set of warped stairs into a room that smells like spilled gin and ambition. This, my friend, is your local watering hole. Let's be clear. Bar is a generous word. It's more like a cellar with chairs. The floor is uneven, the furniture is stolen. There's a sign painted on the wall that says no fights unless necessary. Behind the counter, a woman with arms like tree trunks pours drinks from a bottle with no label. You ask what it is. She says, don't worry about it. You drink it anyway. It burns like it holds a grudge. The patrons are a lively mix. Irish labourers, German bakers, black dockhands, and women who alternate between laughing and threatening to stab someone. Everyone's packed in shoulder to shoulder. A card game's underway in the corner where someone is almost certainly cheating. A group near the fireplace is deep into a shouting match about who won the last bare-knuckle boxing match in Paradise Square. A fiddle player and a banjoist argue through their instruments, turning discord into rhythm, like a musical fistfight that somehow works. And then there's the dancing. It starts small, two men tapping out beats with their heels, then someone else joins in. Before long, half the room is stomping, spinning, clapping and laughing. It's part Irish step dance, part African jig, all energy. This chaotic fusion, born right here in 5 points, is the early ancestor of modern tap. It's not formal, it's not polished, but it's real, raw, and so loud you can't hear your own thoughts, which honestly is the goal. It's one of the great ironies of the 5 points. The worst living conditions in the city produce some of its best entertainment. The area became famous for its wild, diverse, and frequently scandalous nightlife. In fact, wealthier New Yorkers from uptown would slum it for a night and come down here to watch the poor entertain themselves. Reformers gasped. Tourists gawked. But the people of 5 points? They danced. They sang. They made joy out of nothing. You glance toward the back and spot a woman in a green dress singing a ballad in a voice too strong for such a small room. The crowd hushes, just for a moment. Her song is about a lost lover and a long voyage and something else you can't quite catch. There's heartbreak in her voice, but also defiance. You realise this isn't just a song, it's a life story, and everyone here has a version of it. Still, not everything in these halls is romance and rhythm. There's danger too. Tempers flare fast. Alcohol is cheap and strong and often homemade. Fights break out over card games, over women, over old grudges, or nothing at all. You hear the sudden crack of a glass bottle and see two men lurch into each other, fists swinging. No one panics. A few people shuffle their chairs away. The barkeep throws a bucket of water in their faces. They stop fighting long enough to curse her, then laugh it off and go back to drinking. No one calls the police. This is self-policing territory. The barkeep is judge, jury, and sometimes executioner. And of course, there are those who work these halls professionally. Some women are here to dance, flirt, and maybe find someone to cover their rent for the week. Others are here on business, working the edges of the crowd, slipping notes, making arrangements. The lines blur between performance and transaction. Everyone here is hustling in one way or another. There's an odd little fact for you. At the time, some of the best-known dance instructors in the city learned their moves in 5 points. They'd come down to these grimy cellars, watch the locals invent new rhythms on the fly, then take those steps uptown to teach them to polite society. So yes, it's entirely possible your great-great-grandmother learned her dainty waltz footwork from someone who got it from a half-drunk sailor dancing in front of a pickled pig's foot jar. Historians still debate whether these dance halls were dangerous dens of vice or vital community hubs. Some argued they corrupted the morals of the young and distracted the poor from more productive pursuits. Others see them as necessary pressure valves, places where people found joy, identity, and maybe even a little power in a city that gave them so little. There's no consensus, but ask anyone who lived here and they'll tell you the music mattered. You step out of the bar hours later, ears ringing, heart pounding, the taste of bad whiskey still stuck to your teeth. The streets have quieted a little, but not by much. Somewhere down the block you hear another fiddle starting up. A woman's laughter floats through an open window. A couple stumbles by, arm in arm, arguing about something but smiling anyway. 5 Points may be full of pain, but at night, when the music plays and the dancing starts, something else surfaces. Something light. Something defiant. Something that says, we're still here. And for a few hours in those smoky, swaying rooms beneath the city, survival feels like celebration. You've seen the dance halls, felt the floorboards shake under your boots, and watched joy burst through the cracks like weeds through concrete. But now you're about to enter a side of 5 Points that's darker, quieter, and infinitely more complicated. Behind the taverns and food stalls, beneath the shadow of crumbling tenements, there's an economy running on whispers and glances, one that doesn't sell bread or boots, but bodies. Tonight you're walking into the world of the Water Street Girls, and the deeply layered, often tragic business of sex work in the 1850s. Water Street isn't technically inside 5 Points proper, but it might as well be. It's just a short walk away and spiritually very much part of the same world. The neighbourhood's poorest women often drift between the two areas, chasing work, safety, or just a bed for the night. By day, Water Street is quiet, almost sleepy. But when the sun sets and the gas lamps flicker to life, the shutters open and the business begins. You pass a row of crooked houses, each one looking only moments away from collapsing under its own shame. Faded curtains flutter in the windows. A door creaks open, and a figure leans lazily against the frame. Red lips, dark eyes, a posture carefully practiced to look effortless. She watches you without blinking, waiting to see if you're business or just passing through. Behind her, you hear the low rumble of laughter, the clink of a glass, and a soft, steady moan that cuts through the background noise like a thread of smoke. Prostitution in this era isn't a scandalous exception. It's woven into the fabric of survival. In 5 Points and along Water Street, women turn to sex work for the same reasons men join gangs or pickpocket or lie on the docks hoping to be hired. They're out of options. A single mother with no support system, a widow, an immigrant who doesn't speak the language, a girl thrown out of a factory job because she got too old, or too slow, or too pregnant. There are 1,000 doors into this life and very few out. Some of the women here work for themselves, independent and resourceful if perpetually broke. Others are trapped in what's known as the fancy trade, an unspoken system of brothel hierarchies and invisible chains. The more respectable establishments, yes, there's a hierarchy even in this, might have clean sheets and a matron who looks out for her girls. But many are just flophouses with new wallpaper, run by pimps or madams who take half the cut and offer nothing in return but a place to crash and a lock on the door that doesn't really work. And then there are the worst of the worst, cribs. These are tiny rooms, barely wide enough for a mattress, rented out by the hour or less. A woman stands outside, luring men in with a smile so brittle it could break if you look too closely. Inside there's a stained sheet, a jug of something pretending to be whiskey, and not much else. There's no heat, no comfort, no illusion. Just business. Here's your fringe fact for the night. Some brothels, desperate to appeal to higher class customers, handed out business cards. Actual cards, white, with gold lettering. Madame L. Discreet Company for Gentlemen, Canal Street. They were traded quietly, tucked into pockets or slipped between the pages of books. They promised luxury. They rarely delivered. And what about the girls themselves? They range in age from 15 to 50, though many lie about it. Some are stunning, others plain. Some were born in New York, others shipped here from Boston, Ireland, the Caribbean. A few were born into the business, daughters of women who never escaped it. They wear dresses borrowed from each other or bought second-hand from pawn shops. A little rouge, maybe a ribbon. Enough to pretend for an hour that this is something else. The lines between willing and coerced are blurry, and historians still debate how many women in this trade had real agency. Some say they chose it, saw it as a kind of independence in a world that offered women so little. Others argue that survival isn't really choice, and that no one would pick this life unless something, hunger, fear, desperation, pushed them. They're probably both right. Some women played the game, worked it to their advantage. Others were played by it until they disappeared. There are reformers, of course, mostly women from church groups or wealthy families, armed with pamphlets and prayers. They come down to Water Street in pairs, offering salvation and tea. Some mean well, some are just nosy. Either way, they don't always understand that this isn't just sin, it's survival. And when you're choosing between starvation and scandal, scandal starts to lose its sting. In the early 1850s, city records suggest over 500 known brothels in New York. That number's almost definitely low. The police track only the obvious ones, places with too much noise, too many complaints. But most keep a low profile. Some double as boarding houses or taverns, some are just a single room in a larger building where no one asks questions. And the clients, they come from every class. Dock workers, businessmen, even the occasional politician. Hypocrisy walks in with a tip and walks out without a backward glance. You step inside one of the quieter houses, a brothel disguised as a boarding house, and feel the immediate shift in atmosphere. It's warmer, for one. The air smells like cheap perfume and coal smoke. A woman in her 20s, hair pinned back, smiles and offers you a drink. Not because she's happy to see you, because it's her job. Behind her, two girls sit near a small fireplace, playing cards and laughing softly. Their dresses are clean, their eyes sharp. They know exactly what this is. They're just trying to stay warm and alive. One of them leans toward the fire and says, half joking, "I'll marry a rich man one day, and he'll never know where I came from." Her friend laughs, but not cruelly, just tired. Because in 5 Points, dreams like that are currency. They don't have to be true. They just have to get you through the night. You leave the house and step back into the cold, the street quieter now. The lamps flicker low. The city doesn't write these women into its official stories, but they were here. They lived, worked, fought, and died in these streets, nameless to most, unforgettable to the few who knew them. Their stories didn't get written in gold, but maybe, tonight, we remember them anyway. The sun hasn't even cleared the rooftops yet, and the streets of 5 Points are already stirring, though not with the usual shouting and shuffling of adults. This time, it's the kids who rule the morning. Dozens of them, barefoot and wide-eyed, dart between horse carts, balance on rickety crates, and wrestle in the alleys over scraps of bread. You can tell right away. These aren't the kind of kids who spend their afternoons in schoolrooms or playing with wind-up toys. These are the orphans, half-orphans, street kids and ragamuffins who've carved their own society out of the city's neglect. They don't need you to feel sorry for them. They're too busy trying to stay alive. Welcome to one of the most overlooked realities of 5 Points. The massive population of children who grew up on these streets with no parents, no structure, and often no last name anyone could remember. Some lost their families to disease or jail. Some were abandoned outright. Others are technically not orphans at all, just kids whose parents are too deep in poverty, addiction, or crime to care for them. It doesn't really matter. Once you're out here, you're on your own. The first thing you notice is how young they are. We're not talking teens loitering in alleys. We're talking 6-year-olds selling kindling, 5-year-olds digging through garbage heaps for bones they can sell, 8-year-olds watching infants while hustling for dinner. Childhood, in the way most people imagine it, gentle, safe, guided, doesn't exist here. What exists is survival. If you're lucky, you get a crust of bread and a safe place to sleep. If not, well, you just try again tomorrow. You see a boy no older than 7 with a basket of apples, bruised, shriveled, but still sellable. He stands on the corner shouting, "Fresh fruit!" like he's got diamonds in that basket. A girl walks by with her hair tied up in strips of cloth, balancing a wooden tray of matches and ribbons. They make eye contact for a second, 2 tiny merchants hustling in the same jungle, and then keep moving. There's no time to make friends when you're chasing a nickel. Many of these children have jobs, though none you'd put on a resume. They collect bones from butcher scraps, used to make glue or fertilizer. They steal coal from carts to resell. They dig through ash piles for unburnt cinders to bring home. Some scavenge cloth or broken toys to sell to rag dealers. Others run errands for criminals, carrying messages, weapons, or stolen goods across town. A few have figured out the art of picking pockets, especially the youngest ones. Who suspects a kid? One of the more common trades is sweeping chimneys. You spot a wiry boy with soot up to his elbows, barefoot, and carrying a bundle of wire brushes. He's about 10, maybe. If he's lucky, the worst thing he'll get today is a twisted ankle. If not, he might get stuck in a flue, or inhale enough ash to make breathing hurt for days. Chimney sweeps are often orphans, small bodies, cheap labour, and no one to ask questions if they disappear. Not all the kids work alone. Some form little gangs, not violent like the Bowery Boys, but survival crews. They watch each other's backs, pool their stolen bread, and take turns standing lookout. One group you see now is huddled in a doorway, passing around a crust of bread and a bottle of weak beer. The oldest can't be more than 13. One of them spots you and stares, eyes sharp and suspicious. Outsiders are always a threat or a target. Of course, some of these children live in orphan asylums or homes run by charities, but those places are few and often full. Conditions inside are better than the street. Barely. Strict discipline, meagre food, endless prayers, and the looming threat of being sent out west on an orphan train to a farm family who may or may not want a new mouth to feed. That idea, sending orphans away to rural America, has already begun, even in the 1850s. Reformers see it as salvation. The kids, understandably, are less enthusiastic, especially the ones who've heard the horror stories. Here's your strange but true fact. In 5 points, some street children were so notorious they became local celebrities. One boy, known only as Pickle, was rumoured to have escaped jail a dozen times before he turned 12. Another, a girl nicknamed Nellie Nip, made her name running messages for 3 rival gangs and playing them off each other. Most likely half the stories about them were made up, but when you're a kid with nothing, a little legend can go a long way. The scholarly debate here is fascinating. Were these kids truly abandoned, or was the city simply not built to support the kind of poverty their families endured? Some historians argue that what looked like abandonment was actually forced separation. Families torn apart by jail, workhouses, or illness. Others insist that neglect was real and widespread, particularly in immigrant communities overwhelmed by sheer survival. Either way, the result was the same. Too many kids, not enough hands to hold them. You pass by what looks like a makeshift school, really just a church basement where a young black woman is writing letters on a chalkboard while 6 or 7 children fidget on crates. It's not much, but it's something. She offers you a nod, then gently tells a boy to stop eating the chalk. You stay long enough to hear her read a passage from a worn Bible, her voice warm and steady. For a moment, the world outside fades. Then someone throws a rock through the window, and the moment's gone. And yet, despite everything, these kids laugh. They joke. They play. One group is rolling a hoop down the street with a stick, another playing some version of tag where everyone is it, and the goal is mostly just chaos. There's even a little theatre group, half serious, made of older kids who put on short, loud plays for coins. You watch as they perform a mock courtroom scene, complete with fake judge and dramatic sobbing. A woman tosses them a penny. They bow. Night falls and the street empties. The lucky ones go home to a family or something like one. The rest find stoops, alleyways, doorways and coal bins to curl into. Some sleep huddled in groups, others alone, under whatever cloth they can find. You spot one small figure curled up beneath a cart, arms wrapped around a cracked doll's head like it's treasure. Tomorrow they'll wake up and do it all again. And you wonder, not for the first time, how many of these kids grow up to run the saloons, the dance halls, the gangs? How many survive long enough to grow up at all? You've seen the sights, smelled the smells, And now, at long last, it's time to talk about one of the most intimate, revealing aspects of life in 5 points: the food. Or maybe food is too generous a word. Let's go with things people ate in order to not die. If you're picturing hearty meals and steamy kitchens, slow down. This is more maggots in your bread than grandma's stew. But don't worry, we'll walk through it bite by bite, and by the end you'll either be deeply grateful for your fridge or vaguely curious about what boiled shoe leather tastes like. First thing to understand, food in 5 points is less about flavour and more about fuel. Most residents work physical jobs, digging, hauling, climbing, scrubbing, and they burn through calories fast. But they've got limited money, no refrigeration, and highly questionable access to fresh anything. So they eat what they can get, cheap, dense, filling stuff that may or may not have been alive recently. Breakfast. If you're lucky, it's a slice of hard bread soaked in tea or water to soften it. Maybe a boiled potato if one's left from the night before. Some mornings you see men and women clustered around outdoor stoves toasting stale bread over coals. Butter is rare, jam is a myth. Mostly it's dry, cold and bitter, but it's better than nothing. Lunchtime options depend on your job and your coin purse. Factory workers might get a break long enough to eat a cold meat pie, or what passes for one, made with scraps of gristle, turnip and lard. Children buy molasses-smeared bread from street vendors. A few people chew raw onions like apples, swearing it keeps away disease. It doesn't, but it does keep away conversation. And some meals are nothing more than a hot cup of tea and a hunk of cheese that might also qualify as a doorstop. Now, dinner is where things get both creative and mildly alarming. Imagine a pot. Into this pot goes everything you can find. Limp carrots, cabbage leaves turning grey, bones with a little meat clinging to them, and sometimes, yes, actual meat. Beef, if you're rich. Pork, if you're lucky. Rat, if you're desperate. It all gets boiled together into a soup that's more broth than substance. You can tell how long a family's been in 5 points by how many times they've reused the same pot of stew. Some just add to it indefinitely, like a living food project. Flavour, they say. Tradition, they add. Botulism, you think. Here's something to chew on. Literally, bread in 5 points was often mixed with plaster or sawdust to stretch it out. It gave the loaves a nice weight and filled bellies faster. Also, it was completely inedible unless soaked in broth or boiled in milk. Spoiled milk, usually. Dairy was a luxury, and when available it was raw, unpasteurised, and likely delivered in open tins that had previously held fish. Yum. In summer, food storage is a joke. There's no refrigeration, remember? You buy food daily, and even then, it might go bad before the meal's cooked. Meat is kept on open hooks in the sun. Fish is displayed on beds of melting ice that smell suspiciously like yesterday's bathwater. Flies buzz freely. Butchers swat them away half-heartedly while offering you fresh cuts. Fresh, in this context, means probably won't kill you immediately. And the flies... Oh, the flies. They're not just on the food, they're part of the ambience. They swarm over market stalls, land on your bread, and disappear into your soup when you're not looking. Children don't even flinch. It's like they've accepted the flies as dinner guests. Now, if you have a little money and want a real treat, there are street vendors who sell hot meals. Kind of. Boiled corn, stewed beans, baked apples, roasted chestnuts in the winter. In spring, you might see pickled eggs, or something called pepper pot, a thick stew brought north by Caribbean immigrants. Spicy, oily, rich. One of the few dishes that taste like someone put actual thought into it. It's also a rare moment of culinary culture in a place mostly known for cabbage water. But not everything is doom and boiled onions. There's ingenuity here too. Families stretch their food with scraps, invent recipes that defy logic, and somehow make it work. You'll find a woman baking oatcakes on a tin plate over a coal fire, her toddler on one hip, humming a lullaby while flipping each cake with a knife. Down the block, a group of boys roast potatoes in a makeshift oven made from bricks and old sheet metal. Are they clean? Absolutely not. Are they delicious? Surprisingly, yes. Of course, when food is scarce, people get creative. A group of boys you see now is huddled around a rat trap. Not for pest control, but because tonight, if they catch something, they're eating it. It's not unheard of. The rats in 5 points are fat from garbage and relatively easy to catch. A little salt, some herbs if you're lucky, and you've got yourself a meal. Don't think too hard about it. Hunger doesn't care about your standards. You might also spot someone boiling animal bones for broth. Long after the meat is gone, the bones still have value. Broth is cheap, fills you up and keeps for a day or two. It's also a great base for making anything remotely stew-adjacent. You see a family gathered around a pot right now, each person holding a tin cup, sipping slowly, savouring every drop. They don't look unhappy, just tired, just trying to make it one more day. Here's your historical oddity for the night. In some boarding houses, residents pooled food scraps together for communal meals, not out of charity but efficiency. One person brought beans, another a crust of bread, another an onion, and together they made soup. It wasn't glamorous, but it meant no one went to bed completely empty. Think of it as potluck, 5 points style, with a side of tetanus. There's still debate among historians about how malnutrition affected 5 Points residents long term. Some records suggest stunted growth, widespread anemia, and weakened immune systems. Others argue that people adapted, that even the worst diets provided enough to scrape by. Either way, it's clear that food wasn't just fuel, it was a daily battle, a test of creativity, luck, and sheer willpower. So tonight, if you find yourself curled up near a fire with a dented pot of stew, a hard biscuit and half an apple, consider it a feast. And if it's maggot-free, you might just be the luckiest person on the block, and it starts with a cough. Just one, wet, sharp, and far too deep for comfort. You hear it in the hallway, echoing off the cracked walls, and then again from the room next door. By the end of the week, it's everywhere. The neighbourhood sounds like it's trying to clear its throat all at once, and you already know what's coming. Disease. In 5 Points, illness isn't a question of if, it's when, and more importantly, what. Typhus, cholera, tuberculosis, pick your poison. There are plenty to go around. You'd think after everything else, rats, crime, starvation, the people of 5 Points might catch a break. Nope. The real killer here is invisible and unforgiving. Disease moves through this neighbourhood like fire in dry brush. One sick kid at a boarding house, and by morning, half the building is down with fever. The next day, the coughing spreads across the courtyard. Within a week, the block smells different. You start to notice fewer people on the stoops, fewer kids in the alleys, and that's when you know. It's here. The most feared of them all? Cholera. It hits fast and hard. One moment someone's selling cabbages, the next they're doubled over in agony, vomiting and purging until they're nothing but skin and bones. It dehydrates the body at terrifying speed, drawing life out like water from a sponge. In some cases, a person is dead within 24 hours. People called it the blue death, because it turned your skin a ghastly cold colour before it finished you off. Romantic, right? The city's response? Let's call it ambivalent. When cholera first swept through in the early 1830s, New York blamed immigrants, vice, and bad morals. By the 1850s, officials still weren't much better. Sure, they'd cart off the bodies and whitewash the worst buildings, but actual prevention? Not so much. They still hadn't cracked the whole germs cause disease idea, so the prevailing theory was miasma, bad air, and 5 Points, it had plenty of bad air to go around. So what did they do? They cleaned the air, literally. They'd burn barrels of tar in the streets to purify it. Lime was spread through alleyways, vinegar was sprayed on walls. It didn't help. People still died in droves, but it made everyone feel like they were doing something. You'd see neighbours dragging half-dead family members outside in the hope that fresh air might save them, laying them on blankets beside piles of rotting trash and burning tar barrels. The irony, of course, was lost on no one, and it wasn't just cholera. Typhus, spread by lice, ran rampant in overpacked tenements. Tuberculosis was practically a background noise. Every block had someone coughing up blood into a handkerchief, trying to pretend they weren't dying. Scarlet fever took the children, pneumonia took the elderly, and something called consumption, what we now know as TB, just took whoever it wanted, one slow breath at a time. You walk past a house today with a red X chalked on the door. That means someone inside has died. It's supposed to be a warning, but mostly it's just a grim reminder of how normal death is here. The body will be taken out tonight, maybe in a wooden handcart, maybe in a wheelbarrow if that's all they can afford. Some families hold a brief vigil with candles and prayers. Others just watch silently as the cart disappears down the alley. And the children. God, you see them everywhere, wrapped in scarves even in summer, noses running, eyes sunken. Their coughs don't stop. Some are so thin you wonder how they're still moving. Infant mortality in 5 Points is staggering. Some estimates say over half of children born here in the 1850s don't make it past age 5, and the ones who do? Well, they carry that struggle in their bones. Here's your quirky fact for the night. A few particularly optimistic reformers believed you could cure tuberculosis with long walks and fresh milk. So some people tried it. You'd see pale young men walking in circles around the block, sipping sour milk from tin cups and gasping between sips. Did it work? No. But again, it made people feel like they were doing something. There's a heavy scholarly debate about how much the city really cared. Some historians argue that public health in this era was still developing, and that 5 Points simply fell through the cracks of an overburdened system. Others are less charitable. They say the city knew and chose not to act. That because these were the poor, the foreign, the forgotten, their deaths were tolerated, even expected. That it was easier to blame the victim than fix the system. And honestly, looking around, it's hard to argue. Doctors did come sometimes, missionaries too. They'd hold clinics in basements or empty parlours, handing out dubious pills and boiled cloth bandages. But medicine then was hit or miss. Mostly miss. Bloodletting, purgatives, mustard plasters. You got better despite the treatment, not because of it. And when people did survive, they called it a miracle. Some even called it God's punishment turned to mercy, as if that made it easier to swallow. But perhaps the most haunting part of disease in 5 Points is how quickly people move on. One day, someone is there, on the stoop, at the soup stand, laughing in the street, and the next, they're just gone. Someone else takes their space. Their name fades. Life doesn't pause. There's no room for grief in a neighbourhood where survival runs on momentum. Tonight you pass a group of children walking slowly behind a small wooden cart. On it, wrapped in a thin sheet, is a body. A woman sings softly in Irish, something low and mournful, and a few others hum along. They walk the body to the edge of the neighbourhood where it'll be buried quickly, quietly, maybe in a shared grave. The priest mutters the last rites in a tired voice, and then it's over. Done. Tomorrow the cart returns for the next one. You take a breath, and it catches in your throat. Is it just the stink of the alley, or something deeper? You cough once, twice, and suddenly you understand why everyone walks so fast here, why they never stop moving. Because when death walks your streets this often, stillness feels like surrender. By now, you've probably figured out that law and order in 5 Points is more of a suggestion than a reality. You've seen the fights, the thefts, the scams, and the quiet, calculated wrong turns that make up everyday life here. But tonight, we're finally going to talk about the guys who are supposed to keep the peace, the night watchmen, the early beat cops, the enforcers of what passed for justice. Spoiler, it didn't go great. In the 1850s, crime in 5 Points paid, and the people hired to stop it, half the time they were just looking for their own cut. Let's rewind a little. Before there were real police in New York City, the job of keeping order fell to the night watch. That meant a few poorly paid men, usually older, often drunk, patrolling the streets after dark with clubs and lanterns. No uniforms, no training, and no real authority. They were famous for falling asleep on benches or hiding in doorways whenever something dangerous happened. And in 5 Points, everything was dangerous. You walk down Cross Street tonight and spot a pair of night watchmen leaning against a lamppost, talking in low voices and not noticing, or pretending not to notice, a man climbing through a window across the street. Someone shouts, "Stop, thief!" and they look up just long enough to shake their heads and keep talking. It's not laziness exactly. It's more like calculated self-preservation. If you're one of 3 unarmed guys tasked with patrolling a neighbourhood full of violent gangs, you learn pretty quickly which fights to walk away from. But by the early 1850s, the city had introduced a more formalised police force. Uniformed officers, full-time jobs, actual salaries, at least on paper. This was supposed to be progress, professionalisation, civilization finally brought to the wild underbelly of Manhattan. But you know what happens to good ideas when they're dropped into 5 Points? They get mugged, rolled into a gutter, and wake up missing their shoes. Corruption was baked in from the beginning. Many officers were former gang members themselves or still loyal to the neighbourhoods they grew up in. Irish-born cops looked out for Irish gangs. Nativist officers let Bowery boys walk free while cracking down on black residents or recent immigrants. There was no consistency, no real justice. The badge didn't mean fairness, it meant power. And power, in a place like this, was always up for sale. You pass a saloon where a cop is drinking off duty. Or maybe on duty, it's hard to tell. He's laughing with a local gambler, one of those slick types who always seems to have a full wallet and no visible job. Later tonight, that same officer might break up a brawl out front, take a few bribes, and then go back to his drink like nothing happened. If you're poor, justice here isn't blind. It's blindfolded, drunk, and only speaks English when there's something in it for her. And if you were a victim of a crime, good luck. Reporting a theft or an assault could take hours, assuming you could even find a policeman who wasn't sleeping or otherwise occupied. And if the crime involved someone from a respectable gang or a man with connections, you might get warned off. Forget it, they'd say, not worth the trouble. Or worse, you'd find yourself arrested for making a scene. Of course, crime wasn't just random, it was organised, at least as much as the city's efforts to stop it. Brothels paid protection money, street vendors handed over coins to avoid harassment. Gang leaders made deals with police captains to keep their people out of jail. There's even talk of judges taking bribes to reduce sentences or dismiss charges entirely. In 5 points, the line between criminal and cop wasn't just blurry. It was smudged into oblivion. And here's the kicker. People still depended on them, because when the city doesn't care and the gangs play favourites, and your landlord threatens to throw you out, who else is there? Even a corrupt officer with a stick and a bad attitude is better than nothing. You see women slipping coins to constables for protection. Shopkeepers bringing out mugs of ale to the beat cops as a kind of unspoken insurance. It's not a system, it's a mess with uniforms. There's a bizarre little fact for you. At one point, rival police precincts actually fought each other, physically, over jurisdiction. Imagine that. 2 groups of cops, wearing different uniforms, showing up to the same crime scene and brawling in the street over who gets to make the arrest. It really happened. The result? Criminals slipped away while the police punched each other in the mud. Historians still argue about how bad the corruption really was. Some say it's exaggerated, blown up by sensationalist newspapers and political cartoons of the day. Others insist it was worse than most people realise, a rot so deep it took decades to dig out. They point to court records, testimonies and reform movements that wouldn't take off until much later. One thing's for sure, if you lived in 5 points and got robbed, you didn't call the cops, you called your cousin, or your gang, or nobody at all. But it wasn't all hopeless. Slowly, painfully, a few honest reformers began to rise through the ranks. Officers who really did want to help, even if the system made it nearly impossible. Community groups formed to pressure the city for better oversight, better training, and something resembling accountability. These were small efforts, often drowned in cynicism, but they mattered. Every once in a while, a thief did get arrested, a killer did face trial, a cop did lose his job for taking bribes. It wasn't justice exactly, but it was a start. Tonight you walk past a scene that sums it all up perfectly. A young man lies bleeding on the street, 2 women crouched beside him. A constable stands a few feet away, arms crossed, eyes tired. He's not rushing to help. He's not ignoring it either. He's waiting. Maybe for backup, maybe for a bribe, maybe just for the bleeding to stop. Around them, the street carries on. Laughter from a nearby bar, a preacher shouting on the corner, the squeal of a pig rooting through trash. And you realise that in 5 points, law and order isn't about right or wrong. It's about survival. Who you know, what you can afford, how fast you can run. It's a bright morning, the kind where the sun actually manages to pierce the haze and make everything look almost clean. The brick buildings gleam in patches, pigeons strut like they own the place, and for a second, 5 points feels less like the underbelly of New York and more like a normal neighbourhood. Then someone shouts a racial slur, a bottle smashes somewhere down the block, and a wagon rolls past carrying 3 Irish labourers and a very unconscious man. Welcome back. Today, we're diving into the complicated, miserable, and absolutely essential role of the Irish in 5 points, and how a group of people hated almost universally still managed to build half the city. It starts with the Great Famine. Between 1845 and 1852, a fungus wiped out Ireland's potato crop, the staple food for millions. Starvation followed. Disease swept through villages. Landlords evicted families en masse. Over 1 million Irish men, women and children boarded crowded, dangerous coffin ships for America. Many didn't make it. Those who did spilled into port cities like Boston, Philadelphia, and of course New York. Thousands every month. And where did they go first? That's right, 5 Points. Why here? Because it was close to the docks, full of fellow countrymen, and, perhaps most important, cheap. Not cheap as in affordable, cheap as in no one else wanted it. Tenements already sagging under their own weight now took on entire new families. Kitchens doubled as bedrooms, closets became homes. The Irish huddled together, desperate, terrified, and immediately greeted with all the warmth of a punch in the teeth. No Irish need apply. You see the signs everywhere, in store windows, in newspaper ads, on tavern doors. The message is crystal clear. We'd rather hire anyone but you. Americans at the time viewed the Irish as dirty, drunk, superstitious, lazy, criminal, and worst of all, Catholic. It wasn't just a class issue, it was ethnic, religious, political. The Irish were accused of undermining democracy, stealing jobs, corrupting morals, and bringing disease, which ironically they were also dying from at unprecedented rates. But here's the twist. While they were being pushed down, they were also being pulled in. The city needed them. New York was expanding fast, buildings rising, streets widening, sewers finally being dug, and someone had to do the back-breaking labour. That someone was Irish. Men from 5 Points poured into construction crews, dock work, road teams. They dug the foundations of City Hall, laid bricks for factories, and carved out the tunnels that would one day become New York's underground arteries. The work was brutal, dangerous, underpaid. You'd get a few cents for a day's labour, maybe enough to buy bread and pay a sliver of your rent. If you lost a finger, tough. If you died, your boss would replace you by morning. But it was work, and the Irish took it because it was better than starvation, better than crime, and better than shame. And slowly, painfully, they built a reputation, not as welcome neighbours, but as necessary ones. You walk past a worksite now, just a muddy trench with a dozen men inside covered in dirt and sweat, singing to keep the rhythm. An overseer yells something unintelligible. One man climbs out of the pit, limping, and lights a pipe. His hands are blistered, his face sunburned, and he nods at you with eyes that say, yeah, it's hell. But it's our hell. Irish women didn't have it easier. Most worked as domestic servants, Bridgets they were called, often with a sneer. They cooked, cleaned, nannied, and tolerated endless abuse from wealthier families uptown. Many were young, some barely out of childhood themselves, and often lived in the same houses where they worked, sleeping in tiny attic rooms or basements. Their employers distrusted them, mocked them, and still relied on them completely. But these women sent money home. They supported entire families. They saved. They pooled their earnings with neighbours and founded mutual aid societies. Some even opened businesses, boarding houses for other Irish girls, dress shops, bakeries. You see one now, a little storefront with hand-lettered signage and a window full of dry, crumbling scones. A woman stands inside, proudly sweeping the floor, watching the street with the tired satisfaction of someone who's earned every breath she takes. And while the Irish were scraping by, they were also building institutions, churches, schools, newspapers. The Catholic Church in particular was a pillar of the community, offering not just religion, but social structure, protection, and a sense of identity. Priests became community leaders, helping families navigate a hostile city. Nuns ran orphanages, soup kitchens, and rudimentary hospitals. It wasn't perfect. There was corruption and conflict, but it was something. A lifeline in a sea of sinking ships. Here's your quirky fact. Irish immigrants were so politically active even early on that some were accused of voting from the grave. And honestly, they might have. Tammany Hall, the city's infamous political machine, saw the Irish as both a voting bloc and a tool. In exchange for support, Tammany offered favours: jobs, housing, legal help. Was it corrupt? Absolutely. But it worked. And for many Irish families, politics was the only ladder that wasn't on fire. Not everyone agrees on just how oppressed the Irish really were. Some historians argue that while they faced discrimination, their whiteness ultimately gave them advantages denied to black and other non-European immigrants. Others point to decades of poverty, violence, and social exclusion as evidence that being Irish in 1850s New York was anything but a free ride. The truth is complicated, as it always is, but undeniable. The Irish were both reviled and relied upon. kicked down and pulled up, starved out and welcomed in. You can still see the scars. Families sleeping 10 to a room, men coughing up black soot, girls walking home from uptown jobs in threadbare shoes. But you also see strength. A father in a patch coat walking his daughter to mass. A group of boys playing stickball with a rock and a broom handle. A pub filled with laughter and fiddle music, thick with the smell of boiled potatoes and cheap beer. No one in 5 Points is living well, but the Irish are living stubbornly, and that's something. So next time someone tells you the Irish were lazy or weak or drunk, remember this. They dug the streets you walk on, scrubbed the floors you eat from, and buried their dead in dirt they couldn't afford to own. And somehow, despite it all, they kept singing. You turn onto a quieter side street, the kind with fewer drunks and more laundry lines, and for the first time in a while, there's a shift in the air. Not cleaner exactly. This is still 5 Points after all, but calmer, more watchful. This stretches home to one of the city's most overlooked populations, its free black residents. In the 1850s, New York's African-American community is small but resilient. And here, in the most chaotic neighborhood in America, they carve out a life for themselves with grit, grace, and the kind of quiet strength that doesn't need applause to be real. By the time you're walking these streets, slavery has been abolished in New York. Technically, officially. The final, gradual emancipation laws wound down in 1827, and now, nearly 30 years later, a generation of free black men and women live, work and raise families in neighborhoods like this one. But don't confuse legal freedom with actual equality. These residents still face crushing racism, on the job, in housing, in the eyes of the law, and in the teeth of every Bowery boy looking to make a point with a brick. Still, they stay. They build. You pass a small wooden church now, plain on the outside but humming with gospel music on Sunday mornings. It's more than a place of worship. It's a school, a meeting hall, a safe house, and next to it, a barbershop run by a man with hands like worn leather and a smile that comes easy. His chair has seen more confessions than some pulpits. People come here for haircuts, yes, but also for news, protection, and occasionally matchmaking. Community lives in the cracks. Black-owned businesses in 5 Points are everywhere if you know where to look. Tailors, midwives, washerwomen, teachers. Some serve only black clientele, by choice or necessity. Others, like a popular pie stall you pass now, serve anyone with money and manners. The woman behind the cart hands a small apple tart to a barefoot Irish boy, then nods curtly when he thanks her. Business is business. In a place like this, you don't survive by being picky. But even here, in a neighborhood already defined by poverty and struggle, the racism is relentless. Black residents face the same miserable conditions: cramped housing, disease, starvation, but with even fewer protections. Landlords discriminate, employers exploit, policemen harass, and worst of all, when the mobs come, they come for them first. You overhear a conversation between two older women on a stoop. They're speaking low, carefully about that night last summer when a white gang stormed down the block, breaking windows and setting fires. They talk about hiding children in root cellars, about keeping quiet while the screaming passed. It's not the first time it's happened, and everyone knows it won't be the last. Still, there is pride. The children here go to school, when allowed, and learn to read from worn copies of the Bible and borrowed slates. Many parents are adamant. Education is armour. Some of these children will grow up to become ministers, teachers, even activists. And it starts here, with scratched-up chalkboards and late-night lessons by candlelight. You meet a woman named Eliza, working as a laundress. She's standing knee-deep in suds in a backyard wash tub, forearms strong from lifting gallons of water and beating linens against smooth stones. She tells you she was born free, her mother wasn't, and her grandmother died enslaved in Virginia. Her voice is calm, clear. "I can read," she says simply. "I can vote. Well, in theory. I can raise my children in my name." She shrugs. Some call that freedom. I call it a start. Here's a lesser-known historical detail. In the 1850s, black men in New York could technically vote, but only if they met a property requirement. White men didn't have that restriction, so while it was legal, it was mostly inaccessible. Still, some saved enough to buy small plots of land in far-flung parts of the city, just to meet the requirement. It was as much about pride as politics, a way of saying, "We're here, we count." There's an ongoing debate among historians about just how integrated Five Points really was. Some claim it was a rare pocket of racial coexistence, pointing to intermarriage, shared housing, and cultural exchange, especially in music and dance. Others argue it was merely proximity without real unity, and that black residents were often isolated within an already marginalised neighbourhood. The truth, of course, is somewhere in between. You can share a street without sharing safety. You can hear the same fiddle tune without being welcome at the party. Take music, for example. African and Irish rhythms clashed and combined here, especially in the dance halls. Tap dance, as we know it today, was born from this collision. Irish step dancing met African drumming footwork in smoky rooms full of sawdust and sweat. A black drummer and an Irish fiddler performing side by side wasn't just possible, it was common. That didn't mean they shared a table or a drink after. It meant that art sometimes outpaced society. And then, of course, there were the reformers. Some genuinely cared. Others just wanted to document the suffering and move on. A well-dressed man once came into the neighbourhood to take notes on Negro poverty for a newspaper. When asked if he wanted to interview someone, he said, "No need, I've seen enough." He left after 5 minutes. You wonder if he ever wrote his article. You wonder if he understood anything at all. Today you pass a building being painted by hand, brush by brush, by two men in worn suits. They're volunteers from a local church, repainting the home of an elderly widow who can't do it herself. One whistles as he works. The other hums a hymn under his breath. There's no audience, no applause, just the steady rhythm of community taking care of its own. And then you notice a new family moving into the building next door. A young black couple with a baby wrapped in a shawl, carrying a small trunk and a big dream. They nod to the volunteers. One of the men pauses, wipes his brow and says, "Welcome home." In a place where the city has failed them, where the police ignore them, and where even hope comes with a footnote, this moment means everything. Because for all its flaws, 5 Points is still one of the few places where black families can put down roots, where they can be seen, where they can survive, and maybe, someday, do more than survive. You wake to the sound of bells, not church bells, those are deeper, slower, but smaller, sharper ones, ringing from somewhere nearby. As you pull yourself up from the thin mat you've been calling a bed, you realise the bells are attached to a wagon rumbling down the street. It's not a vendor, not a hearse, not even a delivery. It's the soup wagon, one of several rolling kitchens that circle the neighbourhood each morning, offering free meals and a hot sermon, in that exact order. If you're hungry, and you are, you'll sit through the verse. That's the deal. Because here in 5 Points, religion, charity and survival don't live in separate corners. They're all tangled together, one block bleeding into the next. You can't walk a full street without passing a mission, a tavern, and a boarding house, sometimes all in the same building. God and Jinn, sin and salvation, right there side by side like squabbling siblings. And this odd balance, it's what gives the neighbourhood its uniquely contradictory flavour. You follow the wagon to a small courtyard where volunteers are already ladling out soup. Thin, steaming, full of more water than nourishment. Still, it's warm, and that alone makes it a luxury. You sit with a dozen others, listening to a man with a stern beard read from a Bible, his voice practiced and precise. "Blessed are the poor in spirit," he begins, as someone next to you slurps loudly. You try not to smile. No one here is poor in spirit. They've got plenty of that. What they're poor in is literally everything else. The man's from the Ladies' Home Mission, one of several Protestant reform organisations working hard to save the souls of 5 Points residents, whether they've asked for saving or not. These groups set up soup kitchens, sewing circles, reading classes, temperance lectures, and even moral bathing lessons, whatever that means. Their mission: to uplift the lower classes and shine a light into the dark corners of the city's soul. Also, to make sure you don't drink, dance, or sleep in the wrong bed. You know, upliftment. Across the street from the mission is a saloon, open for business even before noon. Inside, a piano is playing a jaunty tune, and a handful of men are already deep into their first drinks. This is the other side of the street, the one the reformers glare at on their way home. The saloon is many things: bar, boarding house, unofficial town hall, place to forget what time it is. It's where fights start, where secrets are traded, where debts are dodged and drinks are poured strong enough to knock out memory. You step inside and feel the immediate shift. Warm, dark, close. A man behind the bar pours a splash of something brown into a chipped cup and slides it down with a nod. No one asks your name. No one cares why you're here. That's the beauty of it. In the missions, you're a soul. In the saloon, you're just a body. And that's sometimes the better deal. But here's where things get complicated. Because for all their pearl clutching and finger pointing, the reformers aren't always wrong. The neighbourhood is falling apart. People are sick and starving and constantly want rent payment from the street. Kids grow up faster than they should. Men die younger than they deserve. And in the absence of any real government help, these moral crusaders are often the only ones showing up with food, blankets, or help finding work. You pass a boarding house run by Catholic nuns. Yes, actual nuns, full habits and all. Inside, they care for orphans, run a tiny school, and cook vast vats of porridge that somehow always taste like both milk and chalk. They don't ask you to convert, but they do expect you to be polite, attend morning prayers, and avoid swearing too colourfully near the children. These women are tough. They've seen more death than most soldiers, and can carry a crying toddler in one arm and a pot of stew in the other without blinking. Still, the conflict between secular and sacred plays out daily. Reformers blame the saloons for keeping people poor. Saloons blame the reformers for shaming those who are just trying to cope. And the people of 5 Points? They exist in the middle. Some attend services in the morning and spend their nights at dance halls. Some swear off drink forever, until the next bad week. Others keep their heads down and don't bother choosing sides. They're not interested in winning a moral war. They're just trying to make it to payday. Here's your quirky historical detail for the night. One mission in the area set up a sin exchange. A chalkboard where residents could list what vices they were giving up in exchange for a bowl of stew. So you'd see things like gin, 2 weeks, or swearing at neighbours, 3 days. No one was checking, of course, but it gave people a sense of ownership, of being part of something larger than their hunger. And what about the churches themselves? Oh, there are many. Catholic, Methodist, Baptist, Episcopal, tiny wooden chapels and towering stone cathedrals. Some are beautiful, some look like a stiff wind could knock them over. But every Sunday the bells ring and people pour in, dressed in their best, however ragged, eyes lifted, voices raised. For an hour, maybe 2, the world narrows to a wooden pew, a hymn book, and a flickering candle. For some, it's habit. For others, hope. Historians still argue whether these reform efforts did more harm than good. Some say they provided essential aid and helped inspire future social safety nets. Others argue they were paternalistic, judgmental, and more concerned with appearances than actual change. They held up morality like a measuring stick, and anyone who didn't fit was labelled a failure. But down here on the street level, it's not about theories, it's about choices. You can go to church, get a bowl of soup, listen to someone tell you how to live. Or you can go to the saloon, drown the noise in cheap whiskey, and listen to someone lie about the odds in tonight's dice game. Neither option promises salvation. Both offer temporary comfort. As the afternoon wears on, the mission closes its doors and the bar opens its back room. You hear the beginning of a sermon echo from the church down the block, mixing with a piano tune rolling out of the dance hall. Somewhere in the middle, a man walks down the street with a Bible in one hand and a flask in the other, whistling a hymn. He stops, thinks, takes a swig, then keeps walking. This is 5 Points in perfect form: soup and sin, church and cheers, redemption on one side of the street and relapse on the other. And if you're lucky, maybe you find a little peace in between. It's hot. Not just the usual swampy 5 Points heat, but the kind that makes your skin stick to your shirt and your shirt stick to your skin, and you can smell tempers rising before the first punch is even thrown. The air feels electric, like the whole neighbourhood is holding its breath, waiting for something to snap. It's 1853, and 5 Points is about to boil over. Again. You hear it in the shouting, see it in the clustered groups of young men on street corners, hands twitching toward bricks and clubs. The riot is coming. The riot is always coming. And this time, it won't leave quietly. If you want to understand why 5 Points erupts the way it does, you need to understand 2 things. 1, this neighbourhood is a powder keg, and 2, the fuse is always lit. All it takes is one spark, a fight over wages, a gang dispute, a political speech, a rumour gone wrong, and suddenly the streets are full of bodies, fists, fire, blood, and no one's really in charge. The police are overwhelmed before they even arrive. The gangs take over. Everyone else just tries not to die. This particular spark. A scuffle between an Irish labourer and a Bowery boy outside a bar. No surprise there. One accused the other of cheating at cards, or maybe insulting his mother, or maybe looking at him sideways. By the time the story makes it back to Paradise Square, it's grown horns and a tail. The dead rabbits rally. The Bowery boys respond. The shouting starts before the sun sets, and by the time darkness falls, it's a full-blown riot. You're on Bayard Street when the first wave hits. A brick sails through the air, smashes into a lamppost and showers the street with sparks. Then come the shouts, thick accents, curses, names you don't want to know. A crowd swells from 24 to over 100 in minutes. They come armed with clubs, belts wrapped around fists, iron bars, and in some cases literal pitchforks. Not a metaphor, actual pitchforks. Apparently someone raided a stable. The gangs face off in Paradise Square, once a common ground, now a battlefield. The dead rabbits arrive first, red shirts glowing in the torchlight, boots thudding in rhythm. They're yelling, chanting, banging weapons against trash bins, a mix of fury, adrenaline, and, let's be honest, probably cheap gin. Then the Bowery boys arrive from the north, more orderly, more polished, but just as lethal. Their leader wears a stovepipe hat and a look like he's already imagining the headlines. The fight that follows is chaos, choreographed only by instinct. Bricks fly, teeth break, blood spatters cobblestones. A man goes down and doesn't get up. Another is pulled from the fray, his face unrecognizable. Women lean out of windows screaming for it to stop. Children hide behind crates, but no one really tries to break it up. This is 5 points justice. It's ancient, it's loud, and it doesn't care who's right. The riot spills across blocks. Saloons are smashed. Windows shatter. Fire catches on a pile of garbage, spreads to a wooden awning, and suddenly the whole street is glowing. The fire brigade arrives late and moves slower, mostly because they're often aligned with one gang or another. They focus on saving the right buildings. Let the others burn. You watch as flames crawl up the side of a tenement, where a woman is screaming for someone to help her baby. No one does. The baby's fine later, but you didn't know that then. Meanwhile, the city's brand new police force, barely organised, constantly undermined, is trying to control the chaos. Officers charge in with clubs, only to be swallowed by the mob. A few fire warning shots, which only makes things worse. The crowd turns on them, forces them back. One officer breaks his leg trying to climb a lamppost to get out of the melee. He's pulled down, not killed, but beaten bloody enough that he retires the next week. In the middle of all this, looters get to work. Stores are ransacked. Crates of produce vanish. A butcher shop is stripped down to the bones, literally. You watch a boy run past carrying an entire leg of lamb, eyes wide, grinning like he just found gold. Somewhere else, a woman is dragging a sack of flour down the street, pursued by 3 men who want their share. You don't know if she gets away. It's tempting to think of these riots as just gang brawls turned sour, but the truth is more complicated. They're political, racial, economic. The Irish fighting for a foothold in a city that hates them. Black residents caught in the crossfire, blamed for starting trouble or worse, targeted by both sides. Shopkeepers trying to protect their storefronts with nothing but broomsticks. Mothers grabbing children and hiding under beds while their windows rattle from the force of the street's rage. Here's your oddball historical fact for the night. In the 1857 Dead Rabbits riot, probably the most infamous of the bunch, so many bricks were thrown that entire building facades had to be replaced. Not just windows, walls. The city spent weeks hauling broken masonry out of gutters, and it still didn't fix anything. You'd think mass violence might scare people into reform, but mostly it just became part of the story. There's still debate about whether the gangs incited these riots or just used them. Some historians say the fights were carefully orchestrated, designed to gain power, make statements, send messages. Others argue they were just outbursts of frustration, barely controlled chaos that exploded whenever the pressure got too high. The only thing everyone agrees on? These weren't isolated events, they were symptoms, and 5 Points was very, very sick. By dawn, the violence fizzles out, not because anything's resolved, but because people are too exhausted to keep going. The streets are littered with broken glass, smashed carts, dropped weapons, blood on the cobblestones, smoke in the air, a few bodies covered hastily with rags or coats. Some people limp home, others are dragged. No one celebrates, no one wins, everyone just stops. You step over a splintered fence, hear a baby crying somewhere behind you, and realise the bells have started again. Not church bells this time, alarm bells, the kind that tell you the city is waking up and the neighbourhood has to pretend everything is fine. By noon, someone will be selling bread from the same spot where a man bled out 8 hours ago. By nightfall, a fiddler will play in the square like nothing happened, and in a week everyone will say they saw the whole thing, even if they were hiding under their beds. That's the rhythm of 5 points. Riot, rebuild, repeat. The city doesn't learn. It doesn't listen. But the people endure, somehow. Through broken bones and burning homes and a justice system that couldn't organise a parade, they endure. And somewhere in all this smoke and rubble, someone lights a cigarette and mutters, "See you at the next one." There's a rustle behind you, a shuffle of skirts and the sharp click of a heel against stone, and when you turn, she's already gone. Just a flash of deep red fabric disappearing into the alley. A laugh lingers behind her, soft but not sweet. Here in 5 points, women don't float through life like delicate flowers. They move fast, they move sharp, and some of them carry knives in their corsets. Welcome to the fierce, foul-mouthed, fearless women of 5 points, arguably tougher than the men and definitely harder to fool. You've probably heard stories about the men, gang leaders, drunkards, brawlers and labourers, but the women here are their own force of nature, and in many ways even more impressive. Because while the men can fight their way to respect, or at least notoriety, women have to do it while navigating a society that offers them zero protection, zero rights, and zero room for mistakes. And yet, somehow, they endure, often in boots that could cave in your nose. Let's start with the working girls. Yes, sex work is everywhere here. It's a major part of the economy, whether people want to admit it or not. In 5 points, prostitution isn't just about vice, it's about survival. For many women, it's the only job available that pays enough to feed their families. Factory jobs, domestic service, laundry, those pay pennies, but a few nights at a disorderly house, and you might actually pay your rent and replace your shoes. You walk past one of these houses now, innocent looking from the outside, just a narrow building with a flickering lantern over the door. But inside it's velvet curtains, heavy perfume, and a clientele that ranges from board clerks to city aldermen. The women who run these houses are often former workers themselves, clever, ruthless and well-connected. Some bribe the police, others are married to them. You'd be surprised how many lawmen have their own reserved seats at the bar. But not all women in 5 points sell sex. Many sell everything else. Pies, thread, buttons, baked apples, bootlaces. Some push handcarts piled with old newspapers and bones. Others sit cross-legged in alleys, stitching torn coats and mending socks for a few cents a job. Their hands are fast, their backs hunched, their expressions unreadable. You try to make eye contact and they don't even blink. These women don't have time for your pity. They're trying to feed 6 mouths with 1 spoon. And when life pushes them too hard, they push back. Literally. The women here don't hesitate to throw fists, bricks or bottles. One of the neighbourhood's most infamous gang leaders, Sadie the Goat, earned her nickname by headbutting people before robbing them. Another, Gallus Mag, a towering Englishwoman who worked as a bar bouncer, was said to bite off men's ears and keep them in a jar behind the bar. Charming, right? There's a woman now standing at the corner of Mulberry and Worth. She's not particularly tall, not dressed in anything flashy, but the way the crowd moves around her, you can tell she's respected, or feared, or both. A man bumps her shoulder and mumbles an insult. She doesn't even flinch, just slowly turns, stares him down, and pulls her shawl aside just enough to reveal the handle of a knife tucked into her bodice. The man apologises and walks away. Smart choice. Here's your offbeat historical tidbit for the night. In the 1850s, there were recorded lady gangs operating in New York. Small groups of women who ran protection rackets, sold stolen goods, or worked as lookouts for male gangs. They weren't official exactly, but they had names, turf and rules. One such group, the 40 Thieves Female Auxiliaries, were known for mugging drunk sailors and vanishing into the alleys before anyone could shout. Not just tag-alongs, active players. And it wasn't always about crime. Some women became political voices, social organisers, even underground educators. A few open boarding houses that doubled as safe havens for other women escaping abuse or poverty. Others quietly taught reading and writing in kitchens and parlours, using scraps of newspapers and charcoal on wood slats. These weren't acts of rebellion. They were acts of survival and defiance. There's an ongoing scholarly debate about how much agency women in 5 Points truly had. Some historians argue that they were victims of circumstance, forced into whatever roles society left open. Others counter that these women wielded real power, economic, social, and sometimes physical, and that they used the tools they had to shape their environment. Both sides have their points, but walk these streets long enough, and the truth leans toward the latter. Power here doesn't look like a gavel or a crown. It looks like calloused hands, a steady stare, and the ability to navigate chaos without blinking. Even domestic life isn't what you might expect. Traditional gender roles? Sure, in theory. But in practice, many women are the backbone of their households, managing money, disciplining kids, and handling every crisis that comes through the door. Men might work, drink, and brawl, but it's often the women who hold the home together with nothing but thread and fury. And then there's the mother-daughter dance. You see it in the way a young girl mirrors her mother's movements at the wash basin, the way a teen peeks out from under her bonnet to keep watch while her mother haggles over vegetables, the way women teach girls to walk with their shoulders squared, their eyes sharp, and a rock in their apron just in case. Childhood is short here, girlhood is shorter, but don't mistake them for joyless. These women laugh, loudly sometimes. They gossip, sing lullabies, swap jokes in 3 languages. They flirt, they spit, they dance. You pass a back alley where 2 women are teaching each other steps to a new jig, arms linked, giggling like they're the only ones on earth. It's not about hope, it's about the moment, about finding something light in the middle of the mud. As night falls, you catch a glimpse of another figure slipping through the shadows. She's older, wrapped in layers, her face hidden beneath a wide-brimmed hat. She pauses, glances back, then vanishes into the dark with the confidence of someone who's lived through more than you can imagine. And just like that, she's gone. In 5 Points, the men might start the fights, but the women finish them, quietly, boldly, with a knife in the boot or a ledger under the bed. And if you ever forget that, well, you probably won't forget her. You're walking along Baxter Street now, dodging puddles that may or may not be alive, when you notice a man crouched by the curb, poking through a pile of what looks like bones. Not the spooky horror story kind, more like food scraps, animal leftovers, broken combs and bits of shoe leather. He sorts carefully, fingers quick, occasionally pocketing a scrap with practiced ease. You don't know it yet, but you're looking at a bone picker, part of 5 Points' underground economy. The silent, dirty, wildly creative web of people who figured out how to make money in a place where no one has any. Forget taxes. Forget time clocks and ledgers and clean little desks. The economy here doesn't work like it does uptown. In 5 Points, money moves under the table, through whispers, in the form of bottles, buttons, borrowed favours, or something that just fell off the back of a wagon. There's no stock market here, unless you count the guys trading used boots for onions behind the butcher's stall. That man with the bones, he's not alone. Bone pickers and rag collectors roam the streets every morning, combing through trash piles for anything they can sell to recyclers or scrap dealers. Bones are boiled down for glue, rags are sold to paper mills, even old shoes, if they're not too rotten, can be resoled and sold to someone more desperate than the last guy. It's the full circle economy. Nothing is trash until someone poorer than you says so. Next to him is a woman rolling a cart filled with ash. Yes, ash. Burned wood and coal soot from stoves, which she sifts for bits of unburned coal or tiny nails. Sometimes she finds trinkets, melted coins, bits of jewellery fallen through the cracks, and if not, ash itself is a commodity. Soap makers will buy it. So will tanners. It's dirty work, but everything is dirty here. Might as well make it pay. You pass a stoop where 3 kids are playing a game that's half tag, half pickpocket training. You don't even need to guess, they're good. Fast fingers, quick feet, sharp eyes. One of them, no older than 10, brushes past you and before you can react, flips your coat open and grins. He doesn't take anything, this time, but you know he could have. You're impressed, and a little nervous. Pickpocketing isn't just for fun here. It's a profession, a family trade even. Some kids are trained by older siblings, others by local crooks who keep their own little schools, complete with rules, territory lines and nightly quotas. It's not glamorous, but it's profitable. A good day's take, some coins, a pocket watch, maybe a wallet, can feed a household. A bad day gets you chased through the alleys by an angry dock worker, or worse, a bored policeman. You duck into a cellar doorway and find a girl sewing by lamplight. She's surrounded by scraps of cloth, buttons, and a pile of what appear to be doll arms. She's part of the piecework economy, women and girls paid by the item to sew, glue, or stitch parts of larger goods. Maybe it's a pair of trousers, maybe it's a hat lining, maybe it's 50 pairs of sleeves that will never see a matching shirt. They're paid pennies, usually by middlemen who show up once a week to collect finished work and drop off new supplies. The deadlines are brutal, the pay is worse, but the work comes home with you, which means no one has to watch your kids while you earn enough to keep them alive. And speaking of kids, remember that apple seller? The one on the corner with the gap-toothed grin? He doesn't own that cart. He rents it from an older man who owns 3 carts and charges daily rates. The boy makes a few cents a day if he's lucky, but the cart owner doesn't care either way. He'll find someone else tomorrow if this one doesn't show up. That's capitalism in 5 points. Sharp, fast, and not particularly kind to children. Some women run laundries, unofficial, under-the-table operations where they wash clothes for wealthier families uptown. The catch? They have to walk miles to pick up the dirty linens and return them scrubbed and pressed by hand, all without losing a sock or catching a cold. Their tools? A washboard, a bar of lye soap, a strong back, and a smile polite enough to keep customers from reporting them to the real laundries. Then there are the scammers. Oh, the ingenuity. There's a guy running a fake orphan charity, collects donations in the morning, drinks them by night. Another runs a shell game on the corner. His hands a blur as he takes a week's wages from men who really should know better. There's even a woman who sells miracle elixirs made of coloured water and molasses, claiming they cure everything from indigestion to infidelity. They don't, obviously, but her pitch is so good you half consider buying one just out of respect. Here's your quirky fact for the night. During the 1850s, it wasn't unusual for people to rent their beds by the hour. Not the room, mind you, the bed. One person sleeps during the day, another at night. Shifts rotate. Sometimes families rent a single mattress in 8-hour blocks, sleeping in layers, like economic lasagna. If you snore too loud, the next shift might throw a shoe at your head. Historians have long debated whether this underground economy was a sign of urban decay or urban brilliance. Was it a symptom of failure, proving how badly the city had neglected its poorest? Or was it a testament to resilience, a sign that even when systems collapse, people build their own? You can see both sides. But standing here, watching a boy polish shoes with his own spit and a scrap of burlap, you're leaning toward resilience. It might be ugly, but it works. Tonight the neighbourhood is quieter than usual. The gangs are laying low. The watchmen are ignoring everything. But the economy, it's still humming. A man is selling second-hand boots from a blanket. A woman counts change from a dice game she's running in the shadow of a mission. A child walks past dragging a bag full of old nails and dreams. And you realise this place might be poor, broken and barely hanging on, but it moves, it adapts, it hustles. When the official systems leave you behind, you build your own, out of bones, out of thread, out of nothing. You're walking the edge of Mulberry Bend just as dusk softens the ragged skyline, and the air smells like horse sweat, stale beer, and someone cooking something that should have been thrown out 2 days ago. Sounds about right. You pause at a corner where 3 boys are huddled together playing cards. Well, pretending to. One's watching the street. Another's got a brick tucked in his lap just in case things get unfriendly. It's not just a game, it's lookout duty. Because in 5 points, gangs aren't shadows lurking in alleys. They're the rhythm of the block. The local government. The big brothers. The bad cousins. The reason you're not robbed. Or the reason you are. If you're picturing old-timey thugs in cartoon bowler hats yelling, "You dirty rat," slow down. The real-life gangs of New York in the 1850s were messy, political, deeply loyal, and way more organised than most people want to admit. This isn't a random pile of tough guys. These are names that carry weight. The Dead Rabbits, the Bowery Boys, the Roach Guards, the Wyos. Some are Irish, some native-born, some mixed. But they all rule their streets like little kings, just dirty, bruised and unpaid. The Dead Rabbits. You've heard their name a few times by now. They're the most notorious Irish gang in 5 points, known for their red vests, their brass knuckles, and their absolute refusal to back down from any fight, even the ones they can't win. Their name? Possibly from a misunderstanding of ready and a thick brogue. Or maybe it's because they once tossed a literal dead rabbit onto a saloon floor to signal the start of a riot. No one's totally sure. That's part of their charm, also part of their problem. On the other side of the fight, literally and figuratively, are the Bowery Boys. They're Protestant, nativist, anti-immigrant, and proud of it. Picture well-dressed young men in stovepipe hats, their hair greased to perfection, fists swinging for God and country, by which they mean America for Americans. Their turf is uptown, but they roam into 5 Points when it's time to brawl, vandalise, or remind people who's boss. You step into a narrow alley and find a group of young men standing around a fire barrel, passing a bottle and swapping rumours. One pulls a knife from his boot, not threateningly, just to clean his fingernails. Another nods to you, half challenge, half welcome. You've wandered into Dead Rabbit territory, the safest place in the neighbourhood, if you're on their side, the most dangerous, if you're not. The thing about these gangs is that they're more than just fists and fire. They're social structures, safety nets. They help their members find jobs, protect their families, even pay bail when things go sideways. You need money to bury your brother? The gang might chip in. You need someone to deal with a landlord who won't fix the stove? One visit from a gang rep usually clears that up. It's not exactly justice, but it gets the job done, and fast. And yes, they're violent, extremely. Gangs settle disputes with clubs, bricks, hatchets, whatever's handy. Street fights can last hours, sometimes days. You pass a wall still stained from a brawl that ended with a man losing 3 teeth and a chunk of ear. But what the papers don't print is what happens afterward. Gang members collecting the wounded, patching each other up, making sure someone brings stew to the family of a guy who got dragged off to the tombs. It's twisted loyalty, but it's loyalty all the same. Here's a fun historical footnote. In some neighbourhoods, gangs threw parades. Actual, organised, uniformed parades through the streets to show off their size, strength, and swagger. The Dead Rabbits once strutted past rival territory in full force. Red shirts, banners, the works. Just to say, don't forget who owns this block. Of course, the Bowery Boys responded with their own parade, which immediately turned into a riot. You could set your watch by it. Historians still argue about how organised these gangs really were. Some describe them as early versions of the mafia, structured, hierarchical, and criminally strategic. Others say they were more like loose-knit street crews, held together by shared poverty, ethnicity, and a love of fighting. The truth is probably somewhere in between. There were rules, there were leaders, and sometimes those leaders got involved in politics. Oh yes, politics. Tammany Hall, the infamous Democratic machine, loved the gangs. They didn't just tolerate them, they used them. Gangs helped get voters to the polls, helped stuff the polls in some cases. They broke up opposition rallies, intimidated reformers. In exchange, Tammany offered protection, leniency, even jobs on the city payroll. A dead rabbit might spend his morning breaking jaws and his afternoon sweeping streets on a city contract. Duality, baby. You pass a tavern where 2 gang lieutenants are sitting in the back room deep in whispered conversation. There's money on the table and a stack of voter registration forms nearby. You don't ask questions, but you note the glint in their eyes, the way they calculate everything. These aren't street thugs. They're businessmen in blood-stained boots. And let's not pretend they were all male. Women in the gangs didn't just pour drinks and patch wounds. Some led their own operations, organised theft rings, or served as spies between factions. A quick smile, a slipped note, and suddenly a whole raid goes sideways. They knew when to fight and when to disappear. Don't be fooled by the petticoats. Back out on the street, the mood has shifted again. It's later now, quieter. But you sense tension behind the silence, something brewing. Maybe a turf dispute, maybe a debt unpaid, maybe nothing at all. You walk faster, not because you're scared, but because you respect the rhythm of this place. When it feels like something's about to happen, it usually is. A kid rushes past you, breathless, whispering something to a man on the corner. The man nods once and vanishes into the shadows. You don't follow, you just keep moving. In 5 Points, knowing when not to get involved is its own kind of survival skill. At the end of the block you hear laughter, rough, loud, genuine. A group of dead rabbits celebrating something in a basement bar. You wonder how many of them will wake up tomorrow, or if they'll wake up in jail, or not at all, and still, they laugh. That's the thing. These gangs may be dangerous, but they're also human. They bleed, they mourn, they love their brothers in ways that don't need words. So next time someone mentions the gangs of New York, remember, these weren't just caricatures from a Scorsese movie. They were poor kids, immigrants, outcasts. They were violent, yes, but they were also loyal, strategic, and weirdly principled in a world that gave them no other map. And in the twisted economy of 5 points, they were often the only ones who kept the rules, even if those rules were written in blood. The sky this morning is a flat sheet of grey, the kind that doesn't promise rain but might just dump it on you anyway, just to be petty. The streets are quieter than usual, like the whole neighbourhood is holding its breath. Not in fear, more in expectation. Something's happening today. Not a fight, not a fire, something rarer. A wedding, and not just any wedding, but a 5-point special, the kind that somehow mixes lace and liquor, romance and rotten floorboards, faith and financial ruin. You slow your pace, curious, as the sounds of a fiddle and off-key singing drift from a tenement window. In a place where people can barely afford bread, you'd think no one would bother with ceremonies, but they do. Marriage in 5 points is both sacred and strategic. It's love sometimes, but it's also survival. Getting married means combining incomes, consolidating debts, joining families for mutual protection. Sometimes it means nothing more than 2 people agreeing to live together and hope they don't get evicted before the next payday. The church might not bless it, the city might not record it, but down here it counts. You turn onto a block where laundry flaps above the street like flags at a bizarre little carnival, and at the centre of it all you spot the bride. She's maybe 16, maybe older, wrapped in what once was white and now looks defiantly grey. Someone pinned a ribbon in her hair. Her shoes don't match, but she's smiling, genuinely. Across from her the groom tugs at his too small coat and tries not to fidget. A priest mutters through a prayer, while a few neighbours stand nearby pretending not to cry. You don't need a grand cathedral when you've got the corner of a roofless courtyard and 3 borrowed chairs. That's the thing about domestic life here. It's constantly stitched together out of not enough. Not enough money, not enough space, not enough time, but people try anyway. You walk past a window where a mother is braiding her daughter's hair using a bent comb and rainwater. A boy nearby is feeding pigeons with the last of his bread crusts whistling off-key. These aren't picture-perfect moments, but they're real, and in 5 points, real is everything. Inside the buildings, life's even grittier. Families cram into single rooms, 6, 8, sometimes more. There's no privacy, no quiet, no personal space. Curtains hung from strings divide rooms, babies sleep in drawers, couples fight with whispers so they don't wake the others. And yet, somehow, these cramped quarters still hold joy. Parents read stories by candlelight, teenagers carve initials into floorboards, grandmothers murmur old country lullabies. The human urge to create home doesn't go away just because the walls are mouldy and the ceiling leaks. Of course, it's not all tender glances and cosy poverty. Domestic violence is common, too common, and mostly ignored by the law. Some women stay because they have no choice. Others fight back, loud and furious, and the whole building hears it. Neighbours intervene or pretend not to. Children grow up learning to listen for tones, to sense when the shouting crosses that invisible line between just another fight and get help. It's a harsh truth, and one the reformers rarely print in their pamphlets. Still, love persists. Sometimes you see it in little things. A man slipping a flower into his wife's apron pocket. A teenager running 2 flights up just to deliver a fresh-baked roll to her sweetheart before his shift. An older couple sitting in total silence on a stoop, their hands loosely tangled, not needing to say a word. The city above may be spinning into chaos, but down here, these small gestures are the anchors. Here's your curious detail for the night. Midwives in 5 points often served as more than just birth attendants. They were marriage counsellors, healers, grief whisperers, and neighbourhood historians. Some carried little notebooks filled with family stories, bloodlines, and debts paid in chickens or wool. They knew who was really married, who was pretending, and who was slipping out back windows at dawn. If you wanted the truth of the neighbourhood, you asked the midwife, and if you were lucky, your child would survive. Infant mortality in 5 points is brutal. Disease, malnutrition, accidents. It's a grim lottery. And yet, children are everywhere. Climbing crates, shouting songs, selling newspapers, throwing rocks. They grow up fast and short with sharp elbows and faster tongues. A 12-year-old here is the emotional equivalent of a Wall Street broker. Gritty, aggressive, and able to bluff their way out of any corner. School is a luxury. Some attend ragged little classrooms run by reformers or church groups. Others learn from older siblings or from the streets. By 15, many are already working full-time. Girls in laundries or as housemaids, boys in factories, stables, or out on the docks. Education isn't measured in years here. It's measured in scars, quick thinking, and knowing how to cross a gang-controlled street without looking like prey. Domestic life in 5 Points is full of these contradictions. Love, but also loss. Safety, but also sharp edges. You pass a tenement where someone's painted flowers on the wall using leftover paint and the end of a broomstick. Right below it, someone scrawled a swear word. Somehow that says more about this place than any statistic ever could. There's a scholarly debate about whether 5 Points families were unusually close-knit or constantly fractured. Some point to the overcrowding and violence as signs of dysfunction. Others argue that these hardships created a kind of emotional resilience, a loyalty that's hard to find anywhere else. Either way, the fact remains. People stayed. Families clung together. Marriages happened, sometimes for love, sometimes for survival, often for both. Back at the wedding, the priest finishes his blessing with a shaky amen. Someone cheers, someone else throws breadcrumbs instead of rice, because, well, rice is expensive. The bride blushes. The groom looks dazed, like he can't believe this is really happening. And then they kiss, quick and awkward, and the neighbours clap like it's the happiest moment in all of New York. Maybe it is. That night, the couple's room will be little more than a mattress on the floor behind a curtain. They'll hear rats in the walls and their neighbours through the boards. They'll wake up sore, hungry, and unsure how to afford tomorrow. But for tonight, they're married. And in 5 Points, that's not nothing. That's a declaration. So no, domestic life here isn't gentle or easy, but it's real. It's resilient. It's stitched together from scraps and stubbornness. And somehow, despite the chaos, people still make room for love. Even if it's just enough room for 2 people in a dream. You're up early today. Too early, honestly. 5 Points doesn't really start moving until the sun is high enough to dry the filth off the cobblestones. But there's one part of the neighbourhood that's already humming, even in the blue-grey haze of dawn, the market. Not the nice kind, with clean stalls and polite vendors calling out the price of peaches. No, this is the 5 Points version. Gritty, improvised, loud, and full of smells that are not exactly USDA approved. Still, if you want to eat today, this is where you go. You walk through Baxter Street first, where the vendors are already staking claims on the sidewalk with crates, blankets, or just the boldness to stand still and shout. Fish laid out on boards slick with yesterday's slime. Bruised apples stacked into hopeful pyramids. Eels in buckets, writhing like they know what's coming. And somewhere, a woman selling a mystery meat pie that smells oddly good until you remember what neighbourhood you're in. Buyer beware. This isn't just a market, it's survival theatre. People bartering, yelling, swearing, and bluffing each other for the best deal. A woman with a basket of potatoes trades half of them for 2 hunks of grey bread and a mouldy wheel of cheese. A boy in tattered boots tries to sell a dead pigeon. You don't ask if he caught it or found it. Either way, someone will buy it. Maybe even you, if the stew pot's still warm and your pride is already cold. Some people come here to sell scraps, literal scraps. Ripped cloth, bent nails, broken handles. You see one man standing over a blanket of used buttons and cracked spectacles, haggling like they're gold coins. He's not insane, he's just ahead of the game. In a neighbourhood where nothing goes to waste, broken things aren't trash, they're inventory. Yeah. And don't think for a second that this is just poor people helping poor people. There's a thin, rat-faced man with an apron that hasn't been washed in a decade, wheeling a cart stacked with barrels. He buys bones, grease, leftover fat, then sells it to soap makers uptown at a markup. He's probably better off than most of the folks here, but he blends in. That's the rule. Flash too much wealth in 5 Points, and you're either getting robbed or blamed for everything. Not far from the chaos, tucked into a narrow alley, is a quieter kind of market. A hidden trade that runs on whispers and shadows. This is where people come to sell things they shouldn't have. Stolen boots, counterfeit coins, pilfered silverware, and once, allegedly, a bishop's hat. Don't ask questions. If you want to buy something cheap, it's probably not his to sell. But if you walk away with both your shoes and your dignity, you're ahead of the curve. Then there's the barter economy. Cold hard cash is nice, sure, but it's also in short supply. So you see deals being made in everything from firewood to favours. A hair comb for a sewing needle, a pair of socks for a half hour of childcare, a loaf of bread in exchange for not telling the landlord your cousin moved in last week. It's not just trade, it's diplomacy. Here's your weird historical fact. One common form of currency in 5 points. Teeth. That's right. Good, clean, usable teeth. Often pulled from the dead or the desperate, were traded to dentists who needed spares for their wealthier clients. You'd see shady men wandering the alleys whispering "tooth to sell," like it was a code. Honestly, it kind of was. And while some historians paint these markets as lawless pits of despair, others argue they were vibrant hubs of ingenuity, proof that people, even at their most desperate, will find a way to organise, to cooperate, to make a living. Was it exploitative? Sure. Was it unsanitary? Absolutely. But was it functioning? Definitely. This was a grassroots economy, built from the ground up, literally if you consider most of it happened on the actual dirt. You pass a woman in a patched shawl, carefully weighing a hunk of lard in one hand and a torn jacket in the other. She mutters to herself, then makes the trade. She walks away satisfied. The man she traded with shrugs and puts the jacket on, missing a sleeve but otherwise warm. Everyone wins. Kind of. Meanwhile, on the other side of the square, a group of children is holding a market of their own, selling imaginary goods to each other with pebbles and matchsticks as currency. One boy buys a fish that doesn't exist. Another sells a cake made of mud. They laugh, yell, make change, argue over tax. You watch them and think, this isn't just a game. This is practice. They're learning the rhythm of trade, the weight of value, even if the goods are fake. They're 5 points kids. They're already future merchants, hustlers, accountants, maybe even politicians. Just give them time. Of course, the market has rules, unspoken, unofficial, but enforced all the same. Don't sell spoiled meat unless you want your face spoiled in return. Don't sell in someone else's spot without paying tribute. Don't cheat someone's kid. Don't mess with the lady selling onions. She's got more knives than fingers. These rules aren't posted, but break one, and you'll learn them very fast. As the sun rises higher, the heat thickens, smells intensify, tempers flare. A shouting match breaks out over a rotten cabbage. A vendor accuses a kid of stealing a peach. A fight almost starts, but fizzles when someone shouts that the constable's making rounds. Everyone scuttles back into shape like a school of guilty fish. The constable walks by, yawns and keeps moving. He's seen it all. He's probably been bribed by most of them. Eventually you make your way out of the main square, stepping around spilled vinegar, crushed berries, and something unidentifiable but definitely sticky. Your shoes are worse for wear, your stomach's still grumbling, but your pockets hold a handful of nearly fresh carrots, a lump of cheese of questionable origin, and half a loaf of day-old bread. You traded an old button and a story for that bread. Not bad. So no, the market here isn't pretty. It's not polite, but it works. And when you're too poor to shop uptown and too stubborn to starve, this is what commerce looks like. Shouting, smells, cracked fingernails, and quiet deals made between two people who might not trust each other, but trust the hustle. Because in 5 points, if you can't find a way to sell, trade, haggle, or swindle, you don't eat. And you've got to eat. The sun's setting now, casting long shadows between the crooked buildings, and everything's tinged in gold and grime. You hear the distant thump of boots on floorboards, the murmur of a fiddle warming up, and the unmistakable clatter of a bar stool hitting the ground. Which means one thing, the night is waking up. Daytime in 5 points is for work, for noise, for making deals and dodging trouble. But nighttime is for forgetting. For dancing, drinking, gambling, stumbling. This neighbourhood might be falling apart by day, but after dark it comes alive in a way that's messy, musical, and completely unbothered by your opinion of it. You head toward a rickety building lit by lanterns and rumour. From the outside it looks like it might collapse if you breathe too hard near it, but inside it's music, heat, and chaos. This is a dance hall, one of many. Sometimes they're called cribs, hurdy-gurdy houses, or just that place on the corner where everyone loses their dignity. But whatever the name, it's where people go to escape the filth and debt and endless grind of the 5 point slog. You step through the door and immediately get hit with a wall of sweat, smoke and fiddle music. The floorboards bounce under your feet, not out of luxury, but because they're rotting and badly nailed. Still, no one seems to care. There's a woman in a torn green dress dancing with a man who looks like he hasn't slept in 2 days. 3 kids are jamming spoons and washboards into something that vaguely resembles rhythm. In the corner, an old man plays a banjo with one string missing, and somehow it still sounds perfect. This is more than just a party. It's an institution, a coping mechanism, a social glue. In a world where people die young, debts last forever, and nothing is promised, not food, not housing, not safety, people still carve out time to move their bodies to a beat. Dance here isn't elegant. It's rough, loud, improvisational, and half the time performed in boots that are held together with string. But it means something. A few moments of freedom before the world wakes up again and drags you back under. You find a spot near the bar, which is really just a plank of wood nailed to 2 barrels, and order something that tastes like fire and regret. It might be whiskey, it might be paint thinner, no one really knows. The bartender's too busy watching the card game in the back corner, a mix of serious regulars and clueless newcomers who are about to lose all their rent money. One guy's bluffing hard, the others let him. You'll probably hear about the fistfight later. The music shifts, faster now, and the floor becomes a blur of stomping boots, swirling skirts and elbows that don't care where your ribs are. And this, right here, is where cultures collide. Irish jigs, African rhythms, German waltzes, American improvisation, all mashed together into something entirely new. This is where tap dance is born, where minstrel shows steal ideas they'll never credit, where 2 people with no shared language communicate entirely through movement and sweat. You might think it's all chaos, but there's an art to it. A rhythm. People know when to step forward, when to fall back, when to grab a stranger's hand and whirl into the next measure. You see teenagers dancing with grandmothers. You see gang members dropping their bravado just long enough to enjoy a reel. You see a woman dip a man, and neither of them cares who's watching. This is 5 points choreography. Brutal, joyful, improvisational magic. Of course, not everyone's here for the dancing. There's a guy selling rat bait near the door, claims it doubles as toothpaste. A woman near the back is offering tarot readings in exchange for drinks. Someone else is clearly running a con involving a lucky rabbit's foot that looks suspiciously like a scrap of old glove. You admire the hustle. You don't ask too many questions. Here's your fringe fact of the night. There were people who came from uptown just to visit these 5 points dance halls. Wealthier folks slumming it for the thrill of danger. They dress down, wander in with wide eyes, and either leave quickly or get pickpocketed before they could blink. Some later became reformers. Others came back again and again, addicted to the rawness, the energy, the music. One man described it as a dive into hell with a backbeat. Sounds about right. Some historians say these dance halls were hotbeds of criminal activity, breeding grounds for vice. Others argue they were democratic spaces, where race, class and gender lines blurred more than anywhere else in the city. The truth? Both. It was dangerous. It was inclusive. It was disgusting. It was beautiful. And it was real. So much more real than anything happening in the marble ballrooms uptown. A fight breaks out near the stairs. Not a big one, just a disagreement over spilled beer and someone's unfortunate choice of dance partner. It ends in some shoving, a torn shirt, and the shared decision that no one actually wants to bleed tonight. Everyone goes back to dancing. The music never stopped. That's the unspoken rule of these places. Whatever happens, keep moving. Outside, the night's cooled, and the street is quieter, but not quiet. A group of singers on the stoop are harmonising a hymn with voices that don't match, but somehow blend. A couple stumbles by, laughing, the girl still clutching one shoe. A boy leans out a window and drops a pail of water on his friends below, just because he can. And down the block, another dance hall flickers to life, the next shift of revellers ready to forget everything that waits for them at dawn. You keep walking, past lovers arguing in stage whispers, past a man playing a tin whistle for no one, past a dog asleep on a crate labelled fresh oysters that definitely hasn't been fresh since last week. The air smells like sweat, sawdust, and faintly burnt sugar. It's not perfect, but it's honest. Because that's the heartbeat of 5 Points nightlife. Messy, wild, fleeting, unforgettable. It doesn't pretend to be elegant. It doesn't ask for your approval. It just is. And in a city where most doors are slammed shut to the poor, these places fling theirs wide open and say, "Come in, bring your broken shoes and your busted dreams. Just try to keep up with the beat." Morning comes slowly after a 5 points night, like a boxer getting up after the 9th round. The air's still heavy with last night's sweat and smoke, and the cobblestones are sticky with whatever overflowed from windows, mouths or chamber pots. You step over a splintered broom, dodge a snoring man wrapped in yesterday's newspaper, and blink against the rising sun. It's quieter now. Not peaceful exactly. Just the pause between storms. But you can feel it. 5 points is winding down. Or maybe just catching its breath before starting the whole cycle again. You pass a stoop where an old woman sits with a tin mug of tea, stirring slowly with a bent spoon. Her eyes are sharp, though. She's seen this neighbourhood through its worst and probably laughed while doing it. She watches you without smiling, not suspicious, just unsurprised. You're just another visitor in a place that's chewed up and spit out better folks than you. This morning feels different, not just because you're tired, though you are, absolutely. It's something else. A kind of clarity that only comes when you've been steeped in a place for long enough to stop judging it and start seeing it. The rot, yes. The stink, the danger, the absurdity. But also the pulse, the moments, the way life insists on itself, even when it has no reason to. You pass the mission again, where a few women are scrubbing the sidewalk with what might be vinegar and divine judgment. A boy lugs a bucket from the pump, barefoot but humming. 2 men fix a broken cart axle with rope, spit and stubbornness. Nothing glamorous, but everything necessary. This is how the neighbourhood heals. Quietly, piece by piece, behind the headlines. In the distance, church bells ring. Not the doom clang of fire alarms or the sharp jingle of soup wagons. Real bells, marking Sunday morning. And against all odds, people start to emerge, cleaned up and combed out, in threadbare coats that have been carefully brushed, in dresses held together by pins and hope. Some are here for faith, others just want a warm place to sit. Either way, the doors are open and the pews are filling. Inside, the sermon rolls like a fog over the room, soft, predictable, familiar. Blessed are the meek. You've heard it before, you'll hear it again. But in this room it lands differently. Because the meek here aren't just a concept. They're real, sitting 2 feet from you. They're battered, hungry, hungover, and still manage to show up. There's something sacred in that, even if you don't believe in the divine. Later, out in the square, kids chase each other with sticks and shouts, playing games that haven't changed in centuries. A woman strings laundry across 2 buildings like she's decorating the sky. A man with no shoes sings to himself in Irish, eyes closed, rocking slightly. And somehow, against all logic, the streets feel light, not joyful, but less heavy. Like the neighbourhood is remembering that it's allowed to breathe. You stop at Paradise Square for a while, the heart of it all. The place that's been market, battlefield, dance floor and funeral ground. Today, it's just a square. A few people sit on crates smoking. A couple argues gently over who owes who breakfast. Someone sketches in charcoal on a scrap of butcher's paper. You recognise her. She drew you 2 days ago while pretending not to. The drawing was brutal. You kind of liked it. Here's your last oddball fact. There were photographers too. A few brave or desperate souls with early cameras, hauling heavy equipment into the neighbourhood to capture what the city tried so hard to ignore. Some of the earliest documentary photography in America was born here, in these broken streets. Images of kids with bare feet and wide eyes, of alleyways crammed with life, of women balancing babies on hips while staring down the lens like, yeah, what of it? These images shocked polite society. They were meant to, but they also endure, like this place. 5 points may have been declared unfit for human life, but humans lived here anyway. They built lives out of mould and miracles, out of splinters and soup bones. And even when the city came in with wrecking balls and reformers, the memory stayed, stitched into the bones of New York itself. Historians still argue over what 5 points really was. Some call it the worst slum in America. Others say that's an exaggeration, racist, classist, blown out of proportion by moral crusaders and dramatic journalists. The truth? It was both. It was dangerous. It was filthy. And it was also full of humanity, art, culture, invention, and fierce, impossible love. Today the buildings are mostly gone, the old streets paved over, the square renamed. But if you stand quietly, you can still feel the beat beneath your feet, the stubborn heartbeat of a place that refused to die politely. That dance while starving, that held weddings in the rain, that raised children in hallways and buried friends without coffins and still managed to sing. You turn one last time, just before leaving the square, and catch a glimpse of that same girl sketching. She sees you, smirks, then goes back to her drawing. Behind her, a boy kicks a can down the street, and a woman leans out of a window yelling that dinner's ready, though you're pretty sure it's not. And somewhere, a fiddle starts playing again. 5 Points doesn't end. It lingers, in music, in stories, in every city that's ever tried to build itself from the bottom up. It's a memory, a warning, a miracle, and a dare. And you? You survived it. Barely. So here you are, out of the alleys, past the stink, through the noise, and back into your own bed, probably wondering if any of that was even real. It was. Or at least, as real as history ever is when seen through the smoke of 100 stories. 5 Points wasn't just a slum. It was a pressure cooker for change, a place where cultures clashed, danced, and occasionally stabbed each other in the gut, where people came with nothing and built, well, not much at first, but eventually something. A legacy. You saw it. The tenements patched with hope and newspapers, the kids growing up too fast but still laughing like they owned the world, the women tougher than nails and twice as sharp, the gangs who ruled with fists but also with a warped kind of justice. You heard the fiddle songs that refused to die, saw marriages sealed over crusts of bread, and watched a street market run like a living organism, all teeth and barter. It was brutal, yeah, but it was alive, messy, human, stubbornly hopeful, and maybe that's the whole point. History doesn't have to be clean to be meaningful, it just has to be honest. And tonight, you walked through one of the most brutally honest neighbourhoods history ever coughed up. You saw its worst, and its strange, ragged beauty. So now, as the last echoes of music fade and your mind settles, take a deep breath. You made it out. Your boots are still on, your pockets slightly heavier with someone else's coins, and your soul may be a little more tangled, but better for it. Close your eyes, let the noise of the city drift away. 5 Points will still be there in the morning.